The stagecoach door swung open, and Evelyn Mercer's polished boots hit frozen mud instead of marble. She'd been promised a grand estate, a comfortable position, security. What she got was wind that cut like knives, a half-collapsed barn, and a man whose silence felt heavier than the Montana mountains. Within hours, she'd be holding a dying infant, while a family she didn't know decided whether to trust the stranger who'd stumbled into their failing world. She had no idea this wrong stop would force her to choose between the life she'd planned and the person she was meant to become. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The stagecoach rattled over frozen ground, each jolt sending pain through Evelyn's spine. She'd been traveling for 6 days, and every muscle in her body had memorized the rhythm of suffering. Her fingers gripped the leather strap above the window, knuckles white, as the driver shouted something she couldn't hear over the wind. Through the frost-glazed glass, Montana stretched endlessly, white and gray and brutal. Nothing like the neat brick streets of Boston. Nothing like anywhere she'd ever been. Miss Mercer? The woman across from her, Mrs. Talbot, a minister's wife heading to Billings, leaned forward with concern creasing her weathered face. You've gone pale. I'm fine. Evelyn forced her fingers to relax. She wasn't fine. She'd been traveling toward a future she'd constructed in careful detail for months, and now that she was nearly there, the foundation felt shaky. Just tired. Mr. Ashford's estate is supposed to be quite grand. Mrs. Talbot adjusted her shawl. I've heard he has running water, actual running water, piped right into the house. That's what his letters said. Evelyn had read those letters so many times the creases had worn thin. Position available for educated woman, governess and companion, generous salary, comfortable accommodations. The words had felt like rescue when she'd been staring at her father's debts, at the boarding house walls closing in. The stagecoach lurched. Something underneath made a sound like a bone breaking. Whoa! The driver's voice cracked. The whole coach tilted sideways, throwing Evelyn against the door. Mrs. Talbot screamed. Then everything stopped moving, the coach settling at an angle that made Evelyn's stomach lurch. Silence. Just the wind howling. The door jerked open. The driver's face appeared, red from cold, expression grim. Axles cracked. We're not going anywhere tonight. What? Evelyn's voice came out sharper than she'd intended. We're supposed to reach Ashford's estate before dark. That was the arrangement. Arrangement just changed, miss. He gestured at the landscape beyond. Storm's coming in hard. We're about 2 miles from Blackthorn Ranch. Best shelter around here. I don't need shelter at some random ranch. I need to get to... You need to not freeze to death. The driver's tone left no room for argument. Ashford's place is another 15 miles northwest. In good weather, maybe we'd risk it. Tonight, you'd be a corpse before midnight. Mrs. Talbot clutched Evelyn's arm. He's right, dear. I've seen these storms. They're not like what you're used to. What Evelyn was used to was having plans work out. She'd spent 3 months arranging this position, another month traveling west, and now 2 miles from her destination, everything was falling apart. Fine. She grabbed her carpet bag. How long until the axle is fixed? Day? Maybe 2. Depends on the storm. 2 days. She'd lose her position before she even arrived. Ashford's letter had been clear about the start date. Punctuality reflects character, Miss Mercer. I expect both. The wind hit her the moment she climbed down, so cold it felt like being slapped. Her coat, wool, expensive, proper for Boston, might as well have been made of paper. She could feel the cold searching for skin, for any weakness. Move, the driver said, already helping Mrs. Talbot down. Standing still in this will kill you. They walked. Evelyn's boots, also expensive, also proper for Boston, sank into snow with each step. Within minutes, her toes had gone numb. The carpetbag felt like it was full of stones. Wind drove ice crystals into her face hard enough to sting. She'd imagined arriving at Ashford's estate in daylight, being greeted by house staff, shown to warm rooms with real beds and hot water. She'd imagined starting fresh, clean, in control. Instead, she was trudging through a blizzard toward some stranger's ranch, her future crumbling with every frozen step. There, the driver pointed. Through the white chaos, Evelyn could barely make out dark shapes. Buildings, maybe. Hard to tell. Everything looked like it was being slowly erased by the storm. They pushed forward. The shapes became more defined, a main house, a barn, several outbuildings. Nothing grand, nothing that looked like it had running water or comfortable accommodations or any of the things Ashford's letters had promised. The driver pounded on the door of the main house. Evelyn stood behind him, shivering so hard her teeth rattled. Mrs. Talbot pressed close, both of them trying to share whatever warmth was left. The door opened. A man stood there, tall enough to fill the doorway, shoulders broad under a worn shirt. His face was all hard angles, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked at them without any expression at all, like strangers showing up in a blizzard was a problem he didn't have energy to deal with. "Axle broke," the driver said. "Need shelter till morning, maybe longer." The man's gaze moved over them, stopping on Evelyn. She tried not to look like she was dying of cold, which was difficult when she couldn't feel her face. "How many?" "3 passengers, me and the horses." Something changed in the man's expression. Not warmth exactly, but a calculation finishing. "Barn's got space for the horses. There's a room in back you can use." His eyes shifted to Evelyn and Mrs. Talbot. "You two come inside." He stepped back. Evelyn stumbled through the door into warmth that felt like being stabbed. Her skin started burning as blood flow returned. She stood there gasping while the man closed the door against the wind. The house's interior matched the exterior, rough, worn, functional. A fireplace dominated one wall, logs burning hard enough to make the room almost hot. Furniture that looked handmade. Bare wooden floors. Nothing decorative, nothing soft. "Name's Caleb Grayson." The man didn't offer his hand. "This is Blackthorn Ranch." "Evelyn Mercer." She managed to keep her voice steady despite the shivering. "This is Mrs. Talbot. We're very grateful for your hospitality." He looked at her like hospitality was a strange word to use. "Storm will probably last through tomorrow. You'll stay till it clears." Not a question, not an invitation. Just a statement of fact. "I'm expected at the Ashford estate," Evelyn said. "If there's any way to send word—" "There isn't." Caleb moved past her toward the fire, adding another log. "Roads will be impassable for days. But if Mr. Ashford thinks I've simply— he'll think you got caught in a storm, because you did." Caleb straightened, brushing bark from his hands. "Nothing to be done about it tonight." A sound came from deeper in the house. A baby crying, thin and reedy, the kind of crying that sounded wrong. Caleb's whole body tensed. "Excuse me." He disappeared through a doorway. The crying continued, joined by a woman's voice, low and urgent. Evelyn caught fragments. "Won't eat, and fever's worse, and tried everything." Mrs. Talbot touched Evelyn's arm. "Poor thing sounds ill." Before Evelyn could respond, another woman emerged from the same doorway. She was younger than Evelyn, maybe 22, with dark hair pulled back and exhaustion carved into every line of her face. "You're the ones from the stagecoach?" Her voice was hoarse. "Yes, I'm Evelyn Mercer. This is Sarah Grayson, Caleb's sister." She glanced back toward the room she'd left. "Sorry, I can't. The baby's not well. I need to— Is there anything we can do?" The words came out before Evelyn could think them through. Sarah looked at her for a long moment, something desperate flickering in her eyes. "Can you boil water? Clean cloths? We're trying to keep the fever down, but there's so much else that needs doing," and she stopped, swaying slightly. "When did you last sleep?" Mrs. Talbot asked quietly. "I don't— 2 days? Maybe 3? Sarah pressed her fingers against her temples. "My husband's out with the cattle, won't be back till the storm breaks. Caleb's been up every night helping, but the ranch work still needs done, and— Show me the kitchen," Evelyn said. "I'll boil water." "I'll help tend the baby," Mrs. Talbot added. "Raise 6 of my own." The relief that crossed Sarah's face was painful to see. "This way." The kitchen was small and crowded, smelling of wood smoke and something bitter Evelyn couldn't identify. Sarah moved through it with the efficiency of someone who'd worked there for years, showing Evelyn where things were kept: pots, cloths, the pump for water. "Baby's name is Thomas," Sarah said, filling a kettle. "He's 6 weeks old. Was doing fine until 3 days ago, then the fever came and—" Her voice cracked. "We're too far from town for the doctor. Storm would have stopped him anyway." Evelyn had never taken care of a sick infant. She'd never taken care of any infant. Her education had included French and literature and enough mathematics to manage a household budget. Nothing about fevers or crying or what to do when something this small and helpless was dying. I'll get the water started, she said, because that was something she could do. Sarah nodded and disappeared back into the other room. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen, pumping water into the kettle, listening to that terrible thin crying. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be at Ashford's estate right now, being shown to her room, maybe having dinner with the family, starting her new life in a place that made sense, where things were clean and organized and under control. Instead, she was in a stranger's kitchen, pumping water for a dying baby, while a storm tried to tear the world apart outside. The kettle filled slowly. Her hands were still clumsy from cold. When it was full enough, she hauled it to the stove, nearly dropping it twice. The cast iron was hot enough to burn through cloth. She managed to get the kettle settled, then stood there watching water that wouldn't boil for several minutes. The house creaked under the wind. The baby's crying rose and fell. Somewhere a door slammed. Evelyn's reflection stared back at her from the window glass, pale face, hair coming loose from its pins, coat still dusted with snow that was melting into dark patches. She looked like a stranger. Not the composed woman who'd left Boston. Not the professional governess who was supposed to arrive at Ashford's estate looking capable and refined. Just someone lost, trying to boil water. Footsteps behind her. She turned. Caleb stood in the doorway, holding a stack of cloth that might have been torn from an old sheet. "Water ready?" His voice was flat, like he'd used up all his emotion and had nothing left. "Soon." He nodded, moving to the counter and starting to fold the cloth into smaller squares. His hands were scarred, old burns, cuts that had healed badly, the hands of someone who'd spent years doing hard work. "How sick is the baby?" Evelyn asked. "Sick enough." He didn't look up from the cloth. "Sarah's exhausted. My brother-in-law's stuck out at the winter pasture. And this storm's going to kill half our remaining cattle if we're unlucky." "I'm sorry." "Why? You didn't cause it." He finished with one cloth and started on another. "Nothing to be done but deal with it." "Is that what you always do? Just deal with things?" He looked at her then, really looked, his gray eyes measuring. "What else is there?" The kettle started to rattle. Evelyn grabbed a cloth to protect her hand and lifted it off the heat. "Where do you want this?" "Follow me." She carried the kettle through the house, trying not to spill, into a bedroom barely big enough for a bed and a dresser. Sarah sat on the bed, holding Thomas. Mrs. Talbot was pressing a damp cloth against the baby's forehead. Thomas was tiny, red-faced, his crying weaker now. He barely looked real, more like a doll, something too fragile to exist in a world this harsh. "Set it there." Caleb pointed to the dresser. Evelyn set the kettle down carefully. Sarah dipped fresh cloth into it, wrung it out, started wiping the baby down with movements that shook from exhaustion. "Let me," Mrs. Talbot said gently, taking the cloth. "You rest a moment." "I can't rest. If I rest, I'll—" Sarah's voice broke. "He's all I have. If something happens to him, nothing's going to happen." Mrs. Talbot's voice was firm. "We're going to keep this fever down, and by morning he'll be better." Sarah looked at her with an expression that wanted desperately to believe. Evelyn stood useless in the corner, watching Mrs. Talbot work with the efficiency of experience. The baby's crying faded to whimpers. The room smelled like sickness and fear. "Miss Mercer," Caleb's voice, quiet but carrying authority. "Can you cook?" Yes, somewhat." "Kitchen's yours. Feed whoever you can." He was already moving toward the door. "I need to check the barn before the storm gets worse." "In this weather?" "Animals don't care about weather. They need tending regardless." He paused at the doorway, looking back at Sarah. Something passed between them, an entire conversation in a glance. Then he was gone. Sarah closed her eyes. "I'm sorry you're stuck here. We're not usually—" "Don't apologize," Evelyn said. "Just tell me what you need." What they needed was everything. Food cooked, more water boiled, cloths washed, firewood brought in. 100 small tasks that kept the house functioning while the storm tried to destroy it. Evelyn worked. She found flour and salt pork and started making something that might pass for biscuits. She pumped water until her arms burned. She folded cloth and carried wood and tried to stay out of the way when Mrs. Talbot needed space. Hours blurred together. Night fell, turning the windows into black mirrors. The wind screamed. Every time Evelyn thought about Ashford's estate, about her lost position, guilt twisted in her stomach. She should be furious about this delay. Instead, she was too busy trying to help a family she didn't know survived the night. Caleb came back around midnight, covered in snow, bringing cold air and the smell of animals. He ate the biscuits she'd made without comment, standing at the kitchen counter because sitting down looked like too much effort. "How's the baby?" he asked. "Fever broke an hour ago." Sarah appeared in the doorway, looking marginally less like death. "He's sleeping." Something in Caleb's shoulders relaxed. "Good. You should sleep too," Sarah said. "Later. Need to, Caleb." Her voice went hard. "Sleep. 2 hours. That's not a request." He looked like he might argue, then just nodded. "Wake me if anything changes." He disappeared into another room. Sarah watched him go, then turned to Evelyn. "Thank you for all of this. I know it's not what you expected." Evelyn looked around the kitchen, the dirty dishes, the scattered cloths, the evidence of chaos barely managed. "Nothing about today is what I expected." "Where were you heading? Before the axle broke?" "Ashford Estate. I have a position there, governess." The words felt distant now, like they belonged to a different life. "I was supposed to arrive this afternoon." Sarah's expression shifted. "Richard Ashford?" "Yes. Do you know him?" "Everyone knows him." Sarah's voice was careful. "He owns half the territory, most powerful man in Montana." "He seemed very proper in his letters." "I'm sure he did." Sarah moved to the counter, starting to clean up. Rich men are always proper in letters. There was something in her tone that made Evelyn uneasy. "You don't like him." "I don't know him well enough to like or dislike him." Sarah scrubbed at a pot harder than necessary. "Just know his reputation. He gets what he wants, one way or another." "I'm simply going to be teaching his children." "Right. Of course." Sarah set the pot aside. "I'm sure it'll be fine. You seem capable enough." But her voice said she didn't believe it. Evelyn wanted to ask more, but Sarah's exhaustion was visible in every movement. Instead, she helped clean the kitchen in silence, both of them working around words that felt too dangerous to speak. By the time everything was put away, Evelyn could barely stand. Mrs. Talbot had already claimed the sofa near the fire. Sarah showed Evelyn to a tiny room that was barely more than a closet, just a cot and enough space to turn around. "I know it's not much," Sarah said. "It's fine." Evelyn set her carpet bag down. Through the walls, she could hear the storm still raging, the house creaking under the assault. "Thank you." Sarah nodded and left. Evelyn sat on the cot, still wearing her coat because the room was freezing. Her fine Boston boots were ruined, crusted with salt and mud. Her dress was stained with work she'd never done before. Her hands ached from pumping water and carrying wood. She should have been furious. She should have been planning how to salvage her position, how to explain the delay to Ashford, how to recover from this disaster. Instead, she just felt numb. The baby started crying again. Not the terrible sick crying from before, but normal fussing. She heard Sarah's footsteps, heard murmuring voices. The crying stopped. Evelyn lay back on the cot, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere in Boston, her father's debts were waiting. The boarding house was waiting. The future she'd been running from was still there, patient as death. And somewhere 15 miles northwest, Ashford's estate waited too. The position she'd arranged, the security she needed, the life that made sense. But tonight, in this frozen house in the middle of nowhere, none of that seemed to matter as much as getting through to morning. She closed her eyes. The storm howled. And Evelyn Mercer, who'd spent 26 years learning how to be proper and refined and in control, fell asleep in a stranger's house wearing her ruined coat, too exhausted even to dream. Morning came gray and reluctant. Evelyn woke to silence. The storm had stopped, leaving behind a stillness that felt unnatural. She could hear voices from somewhere in the house, low and tense. Her body ached everywhere. She'd slept in her clothes, which were now hopelessly wrinkled. Her hair had come completely loose from its pins. She looked, she was certain, absolutely terrible. The voices got louder. She caught fragments. Caleb's voice, another man's, both of them angry about something. She stood, smoothed her dress as much as possible, and ventured out. The main room was crowded. Caleb stood near the fire with a man who looked like a rougher version of him. Same build, harder face, wearing clothes that smelled like cattle. Sarah sat at the table with Thomas, who looked pink and healthy now, making little grabbing motions at nothing. The stranger turned when Evelyn entered. "Who's this?" "Stagecoach passenger," Caleb said. "Stuck here till the road clears." The man looked her over in a way that made Evelyn want to wrap her coat tighter. "City woman, can tell by the boots." "Jack's my brother-in-law," Sarah said tiredly. "Ignore him. He's an ass before coffee." "I'm an ass after coffee, too," Jack said, but there was affection in his voice. He moved to Sarah, kissed the top of her head, ran one rough finger over Thomas's cheek. "How's my boy?" "Better. Fever broke last night." The relief on Jack's face was so raw it hurt to see. He scooped Thomas up carefully, holding him like something that might shatter. "That's my son, tough as his mama." Mrs. Talbot emerged from the direction of the kitchen, carrying a pot of coffee that smelled like salvation. "Good, you're all up. Breakfast in 10 minutes. "You didn't have to cook," Sarah started. "Hush, you've got a baby to feed. I've got hands that work." Mrs. Talbot poured coffee into mugs that didn't match. "Besides, I like staying busy." Evelyn took the mug she was offered and retreated to the window. Outside, the world was buried in white. Drifts as high as the fence posts. No sign of the road. No sign of anything except endless snow and gray sky. "How long till we can travel?" she asked. Caleb joined her at the window. "Depends. Road needs clearing. Axle needs fixing. Assuming weather holds, maybe 2 days." 2 days. She'd already lost one. By the time she reached Ashford's estate, she'd be nearly a week late. "Is there any way to send a message? Let Mr. Ashford know." "Who?" Jack's voice cut in. "Richard Ashford. I have a position at his estate." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Evelyn turned. Everyone was staring at her. Sarah with something like pity, Jack with open hostility, Mrs. Talbot with concern. Even Caleb's expression had changed, though it was hard to read. "You're going to work for Ashford," Jack said slowly. "Yes, as a governess." "Why?" "You should know something." Jack set Thomas back in Sarah's arms, his movements careful despite the anger radiating off him. "That man is trying to destroy our family." "What?" "No, he's claiming we're squatters," Sarah interrupted. "Says this land belongs to him, that we're criminals occupying it illegally." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "That can't be right." "It's not right. It's also not false." Caleb's voice was flat. "We've been fighting his claim for 3 years. He's got lawyers, money, connections. We've got paperwork our father left that might or might not hold up in court." "Our father homesteaded this land legally," Sarah said fiercely. "Worked it for 20 years before he died. This ranch is ours." "Ashford doesn't see it that way," Jack added. "And what Ashford wants, Ashford usually gets." Evelyn felt the ground shifting under her feet. "His letters never mentioned—" "Of course they didn't." Caleb turned from the window. "Why would he? Rich men don't explain themselves to hired help." The words stung. "I'm not just hired help. You're going to teach his children for money. That's hired help." He wasn't being cruel, just factual. Nothing wrong with it, but don't pretend it's something else. "Caleb," Sarah said warningly, "she should know what she's walking into." He looked at Evelyn. "Ashford's reputation is built on taking what he wants. Land, water rights, businesses. Doesn't matter if it's legal. Doesn't matter who gets hurt. He's got enough money to make courts see things his way." "And you think I'm part of that?" Evelyn's voice came out sharper than intended. "I think you don't know what you're part of." Caleb moved toward the door. "Need to check on the livestock." He left. Cold air swept in and out. The door slammed. Evelyn stood frozen, coffee cooling in her hands. Everyone was looking at her like she'd betrayed them somehow, which was ridiculous because she'd only known them for one night. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "About the land dispute. About any of it." "Probably true." Jack's voice was gentler now. "Ashford doesn't advertise his dirty laundry. But now you do know. So the question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to do the job I was hired for." The word sounded defensive even to her own ears. Teaching children isn't supporting land theft. "You think those things are separate?" Sarah shifted Thomas to her shoulder. "Everything Ashford does is connected. The house you'll live in was paid for with money from land he took from people like us. The food you'll eat, the clothes you'll wear, all of it. I need this position." Evelyn heard the desperation in her voice and hated it. I have debts, responsibilities. I can't just. We all have debts, Jack interrupted, and responsibilities. Difference is, we're not working for the man trying to take our home. Mrs. Talbot cleared her throat. Breakfast is ready, and I suggest we eat it before this conversation turns into something nobody can take back. They ate in strained silence. The food was good. Eggs and bacon that Jack had brought from the barn, biscuits left over from the night before. Evelyn forced herself to swallow, though everything tasted like ash. After breakfast, she helped clean up while Sarah fed Thomas and Jack disappeared outside with Caleb. Through the window, she could see them working, digging paths through the snow, breaking ice off the water troughs, carrying hay to animals she couldn't see. They're not bad people, Sarah said quietly, coming to stand beside her. I never thought they were. But you're still going to Ashford's estate. Evelyn turned from the window. What choice do I have? I spent everything I had getting here. If I don't take this position, I have nothing. Nowhere to go. No way to pay my father's debts. And if taking the position means helping a man destroy innocent families, I'm not helping destroy anyone. I'm teaching children to read. In his house, eating his food, accepting his money. Sarah's voice was tired. Maybe you're right. Maybe it doesn't matter, but it feels like it should matter. She walked away, leaving Evelyn alone with the dirty dishes and her guilty conscience. The day crept past. Evelyn helped where she could, washing, mending, watching Thomas when Sarah needed to sleep. The men came in and out, tracking snow and exhaustion. Nobody said much. By evening, the driver had managed to jerry-rig the broken axle enough to limp the stagecoach to the ranch. He announced they could leave by noon the next day if weather held. Evelyn should have felt relieved. Instead, she just felt hollow. That night, she found Caleb in the barn. He was checking on a horse, running his hands over its legs with the careful attention of someone who knew animals. Can I ask you something? Evelyn stood in the doorway, wrapped in her inadequate coat. If you're fast, it's too cold for long conversations. Why are you fighting Ashford? If he's as powerful as you say, why not just take what he offers and find land somewhere else? Caleb didn't look up from the horse. This is our land. Our father died building this ranch. Our mother's buried here. Sarah's son will grow up here, learn to ride here, work this ground same as we did. He straightened, meeting her eyes. Some things aren't for sale, Miss Mercer, no matter how much money rich men wave around. Even if fighting means losing everything? We're losing everything anyway. Might as well lose it standing up. He moved past her toward the barn door. You should get inside. Temperature's dropping. Mr. Grayson? He paused. I'm sorry about all of this. The land dispute, the storm, the baby. Everything. Save your apologies. His voice wasn't unkind, just empty. They don't change anything. He walked back toward the house, leaving Evelyn in the barn with the horses and the cold and the guilt she didn't know what to do with. She stayed there longer than she should have, watching snow fall through the open door. Somewhere out there was Ashford's estate. The warm rooms and comfortable bed and secure future she'd been promised. But standing in this freezing barn, smelling hay and animals and honest work, that future felt less certain than it had when she'd left Boston. Less certain and somehow less important. She didn't know what that meant yet, but she knew with bone-deep certainty that the stagecoach that had brought her to Blackthorn Ranch had delivered her to something that mattered more than comfort, even if she had no idea what to do about it. The stagecoach left at noon the next day, wheels crunching over packed snow. Evelyn sat by the window watching Blackthorn Ranch shrink behind them, feeling like she was abandoning something she couldn't name. Sarah had pressed a package of food into her hands that morning without meeting her eyes. Caleb hadn't bothered with goodbyes at all. Mrs. Talbot settled into her seat with a sigh. Strange few days. Yes. Evelyn kept watching out the window until the ranch disappeared completely. Those people are in trouble, you know, real trouble. I know. And you're going to work for the man causing it. Evelyn turned from the window. What would you have me do? I have obligations, debts that won't disappear just because I developed a conscience. I'm not judging you, dear, just observing. Mrs. Talbot adjusted her shawl. Though I wonder if you've considered what it'll cost you, working for a man like Ashford. It'll cost me nothing. I'll teach his children and collect my salary and mind my own business. People always think they can mind their own business, right up until they realize they're part of someone else's. The words sat heavy in Evelyn's chest for the rest of the journey. Ashford's estate appeared just before sunset, and it was everything his letters had promised. The main house rose 3 stories high, built from stone that looked imported, with windows that caught the dying light and turned it golden. Manicured grounds stretched in every direction despite the snow. Outbuildings arranged with military precision. Fences painted white as bone. It looked like power, permanent and absolute. The stagecoach stopped at the front entrance. A man in actual livery opened the door and helped Evelyn down like she was made of glass. Her ruined boots touched gravel that had been swept clean of snow. "Miss Mercer?" The man's voice was professionally neutral. "Mr. Ashford is expecting you, though he was expecting you several days ago. There was a storm. The axle broke." "Of course." His tone suggested this explanation was inadequate but would be tolerated. "Follow me, please." He led her through doors that must have cost more than her father had earned in a year, into an entrance hall with a ceiling high enough to echo. Paintings on the walls, furniture that looked like it belonged in museums, a chandelier that threw light everywhere with casual extravagance. This was what Evelyn had imagined. This was what she'd traveled 2,000 miles to find. So why did it feel wrong? "Wait here." The servant disappeared through a door. Evelyn stood in the entrance hall holding her pathetic carpet bag, very aware of how she must look. Her dress was wrinkled beyond salvation. Her hair had given up any pretense of being properly arranged. She probably smelled like wood smoke and hard work. The door opened. A man emerged, and Evelyn knew immediately this was Richard Ashford. He had the kind of face that looked good in oil paintings. Strong features, gray hair swept back, expensive clothes worn with the ease of someone who'd never questioned whether he could afford them. Maybe 50 years old, maybe older. Hard to tell with men who had enough money to hide time's damage. "Miss Mercer?" His voice was smooth, educated, carrying just enough warmth to seem genuine. "I was beginning to worry. I apologize for the delay, Mr. Ashford. The storm—" Yes, my man explained." He waved this away. "You're here now. That's what matters." His eyes traveled over her, taking in every ruined detail. "Though you look like you've had quite the journey." Heat crept up Evelyn's neck. "The accommodations were rustic." "I can imagine. Where did you shelter?" "A ranch. Blackthorn, I think it was called." Something changed in Ashford's expression. Just a flicker, gone so fast Evelyn almost missed it. "Blackthorn? How unfortunate." "They were very hospitable considering the circumstances." "I'm sure they were." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The Graysons are known for their stubbornness, among other things." He gestured toward the stairs. "But you must be exhausted. Let me show you to your quarters. We can discuss your duties tomorrow." He led her upstairs, carpeted thick enough to silence footsteps, down a hallway lined with more expensive paintings, to a door that opened into rooms that made Evelyn's breath catch. A bedroom larger than the entire house at Blackthorn Ranch. A private washroom with actual running water, just like the letters promised. Furniture that matched, curtains that pooled on the floor in deliberate excess, a bed piled with quilts that looked like they'd never been used for actual sleeping. "I trust this will be adequate?" Ashford stood in the doorway. "It's beautiful." And it was. It was everything she'd dreamed of during those freezing nights in the Boston boarding house. "Dinner's at 7. Someone will fetch you." He paused. "And Miss Mercer? I appreciate punctuality. In the future, I expect you to fulfill your commitments regardless of inconveniences." The warmth had drained from his voice. This was the real Ashford, Evelyn realized, the man behind the smooth words and careful smiles. "Of course, sir." He nodded and left. The door closed. Evelyn stood alone in her beautiful room with its running water and expensive furniture, feeling more trapped than she had in the tiny closet at Blackthorn Ranch. She washed and changed into her only other decent dress, trying to make herself look like someone who belonged here. The water ran hot and clear. The soap smelled like lavender. Everything was perfect. Everything felt like a lie. Dinner was served in a dining room designed to make guests feel small. Ashford sat at the head of a table that could seat 20, with Evelyn placed far enough away that conversation required raising voices slightly. A calculated distance. His wife was absent, died 3 years ago, he explained. Some illness the doctors couldn't fix despite his money. His children were also absent, already eaten and sent to bed. Evelyn would meet them tomorrow. Tell me about your qualifications, Ashford said, cutting into meat that had been cooked by someone Evelyn would never see. She recited her education, her experience, the carefully constructed narrative she'd prepared months ago. It sounded hollow in this enormous room. And your father's debts? Ashford asked casually. Have they been resolved? Evelyn's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. I didn't mention my father's debts in my letters. No, but I make a point of knowing who I employ. He smiled. $15,000 in gambling debts, died before paying, creditors pursuing the family. You fled Boston to escape them. The food turned to ash in her mouth. That's accurate. I'm not judging, Miss Mercer, simply ensuring we understand each other. He set down his knife with precision. You need this position. You need the salary, the security, the distance from your past, and I need someone educated enough to teach my children properly. We both get what we want. As long as I fulfill my commitments. Exactly. He returned to his meal. I admire pragmatism. Too many people let sentiment cloud their judgment. Evelyn thought about Sarah holding her sick baby, about Caleb working through a blizzard to keep animals alive, about Jack's face when he'd learned Thomas's fever had broken. Is that what happened with Blackthorn Ranch? The words came out before she could stop them. Pragmatism over sentiment? Ashford's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. I see they told you their version of events. They mentioned a land dispute. Is that what they're calling it? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. The Graysons are squatting on land that legally belongs to me. I have documentation. They have stories about a dead father and homestead rights that were never properly filed. It's quite simple, really. They seem to believe the land is theirs. People believe many things that aren't true. He studied her across the long table. I hope you're not developing sympathies that might interfere with your position here. Of course not. The lie tasted like copper. I'm simply curious about local affairs. Curiosity is fine. Involvement is not. He stood, signaling the meal was over. You're here to teach my children, Miss Mercer, nothing more. I suggest you remember that. He left her sitting at the enormous table, alone except for servants who moved like ghosts, clearing plates that still had food on them. That night, in her beautiful room with its soft bed and running water, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the contrast between here and Blackthorn Ranch. The abundance here felt obscene compared to the Graysons' careful rationing. The silence felt dead compared to the ranch's constant noise of work and life and survival. She'd gotten what she wanted: security, comfort, escape from her father's mistakes. So why did she feel like she'd made a terrible bargain? The next morning, she met Ashford's children over breakfast in yet another enormous room. There were 3 of them. Eleanor, 12 years old, with her dead mother's features and her father's calculating eyes. Margaret, 9, quieter, watching everything. And Robert, 6, who seemed mostly interested in seeing how much jam he could pile on toast before it collapsed. Father says you're from Boston, Eleanor said, dissecting Evelyn with the same precision Ashford had used on his meat. Why did you leave? I wanted to see more of the country. That's not what Father told us. He said you had to leave because your family owed money. Evelyn felt her face heat. Your father is very thorough. He says it's important to know people's weaknesses, so you can predict what they'll do. Eleanor smiled. It was Ashford's smile, cold and perfect. What will you do, Miss Mercer? Teach you. That's what I'm here for. We'll see. The schoolroom was on the 3rd floor, probably to keep the children's noise from disturbing Ashford's business. It was well equipped. Books, maps, writing materials, everything Evelyn could need, everything except students who actually wanted to learn. Eleanor spent the first hour testing boundaries, asking increasingly inappropriate questions and watching to see if Evelyn would crack. Margaret said nothing, just drew pictures in the margins of her workbook. Robert managed to spill ink on 3 separate occasions. By noon, Evelyn wanted to scream. That's enough for today, she said, fighting to keep her voice level. We'll resume tomorrow. We usually study until 3, Eleanor pointed out. Tomorrow we'll study until 3. Today you're dismissed." The children fled before she could change her mind. Evelyn sat at the desk, staring at the chaos they'd left behind, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. A knock at the door. One of the servants entered, the same professionally neutral expression they all wore. "Miss Mercer, Mr. Ashford would like to see you in his study." The study was on the ground floor, all dark wood and leather chairs and windows that looked out over the estate. Ashford sat behind a desk covered in papers, doing whatever it was rich men did to stay rich. "How were the children?" he asked without looking up. "Spirited." "That's a diplomatic way of saying difficult." He set down his pen. "They've driven off 3 governesses in 2 years. I'm hoping you'll prove more resilient." "Why haven't you disciplined them?" "I'm their father, not their jailer. You're the one being paid to manage them." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. There's something I want to discuss." Evelyn sat, dread pooling in her stomach. "I'm hosting a gathering next week. Local business associates, territorial officials, people of importance." He steepled his fingers. "I'd like you to attend. Present yourself as an example of the refined household I maintain. I'm a governess, Mr. Ashford, not a decoration. You're whatever I need you to be, Miss Mercer. That's what employment means." His voice was pleasant, but the steel underneath was visible. "You'll attend. You'll be charming. You'll demonstrate that my children are receiving the finest education. Is that clear?" It was clear, painfully clear. She was a prop in whatever performance Ashford was staging. "Yes, sir." "Excellent, that's all." She fled the study, anger and humiliation burning in equal measure. This was what she'd signed up for. This was the security she'd traveled 2,000 miles to find. It felt like a cage with silk bars. The days ground past in exhausting repetition. Fight with the children all morning, endure their calculated cruelty. Clean up whatever chaos they'd created, eat meals in the enormous dining room with Ashford occasionally appearing to remind her of her place. Sleep in her beautiful room that felt more like a cell every night. The gathering Ashford had mentioned arrived with the efficiency of military planning. Servants transformed the house into something even more intimidating. Food appeared in quantities that could feed the entire territory. Men in expensive suits filled the rooms with cigar smoke and loud laughter. Evelyn was dressed in a gown Ashford had provided, appropriate for the occasion, he'd said, which meant expensive enough to reflect well on him. She stood in the corner of the main room, smiling until her face hurt, answering questions about the children's progress with lies that tasted like poison. "Quite an improvement over the previous governess," one man said, looking at Evelyn in a way that made her skin crawl. "Much more ornamental." She excused herself before she said something that would cost her the position. The hallway was quieter, though she could still hear the party's noise echoing through the house. She was heading toward the stairs when voices from Ashford's study stopped her. "Grayson problem needs to be resolved." That was Ashford's voice, carrying through the partially open door. "I've been patient, but patience has limits." "The legal approach isn't working." Another man, voice rougher. "They've got just enough documentation to keep things tied up in court." "Then we try something else." Evelyn knew she should walk away, should mind her own business like Ashford had told her, but her feet wouldn't move. "You talking about pressure?" the rough-voiced man asked. "I'm talking about persuasion. Their ranch is barely surviving. One bad winter, one burned barn, one poisoned well. These things happen on the frontier. Tragic, but not uncommon. You want me to... I want you to make them understand that accepting my offer is in their best interest. Whatever that takes." Silence. Then, "There's a woman and a baby out there now, which is why they'll be smart and leave before something unfortunate happens." Papers rustled. "I want that land, Morrison. I've wanted it for 5 years. The time for legal niceties has passed." Evelyn's hand found the wall, steadying herself. This wasn't just a land dispute. This was a threat. A promise of violence dressed up in euphemisms. She backed away from the door, carefully, quietly, her heart slamming against her ribs. Back down the hallway, up the stairs, into her beautiful room where she locked the door and stood shaking. This was what her salary paid for. This was the man whose children she taught, whose food she ate, whose house she lived in. A man who would burn a family out of their home to get what he wanted. She thought about Sarah, exhausted and terrified, caring for a baby who'd almost died. about Caleb working himself to death to save a ranch that might not survive, about the look in Jack's eyes when he'd asked what she was going to do. What was she going to do? The sensible answer was nothing. Keep her head down, teach the children, collect her salary, save enough to pay her father's debts, and get out. Ashford's fight with the Graysons wasn't her problem, except she couldn't stop hearing his voice. One burned barn, one poisoned well. These things happen. She couldn't sleep that night, or the next. By the third day, exhaustion made thinking difficult. The children were particularly terrible, sensing weakness the way predators sensed blood. Eleanor spent an hour needling her about Boston, about her father's debts, about how desperate she must be to accept this position. "You're just like the others," Eleanor said with that cold smile. "You'll leave too. They always do." "I'm not going anywhere," Evelyn snapped, then immediately regretted it. Eleanor's smile widened. "We'll see." That evening, Evelyn requested a meeting with Ashford. He saw her in his study, looking mildly annoyed at the interruption. "This better be important, Miss Mercer." "I need to go into town tomorrow." The lie came surprisingly easy. "I require supplies, books for the children, personal items. Make a list. Someone will purchase what you need. I prefer to select them myself. Teaching materials should be chosen carefully." He studied her for a long moment. "Fine. Take the small carriage. Be back by evening. And Miss Mercer, don't make a habit of this. Your place is here." "Yes, sir." The next morning, she took the carriage Ashford provided and headed toward the settlement that served as the nearest town. But she didn't stop there. She kept going, following directions she'd carefully memorized, until Blackthorn Ranch appeared in the distance. The place looked worse in daylight. Worn buildings, tired fences, work that needed doing everywhere. But there was smoke from the chimney and horses in the corral and the stubborn persistence of people refusing to quit. Caleb met her at the door, surprise clear on his face. "Miss Mercer, I need to talk to you. All of you." Sarah appeared behind him, Thomas on her hip. "Is something wrong?" "Yes, can I come in?" They gathered in the main room, Caleb, Sarah, Jack, and Mrs. Talbot, who'd apparently decided to stay and help rather than continue to Billings. They listened while Evelyn told them what she'd heard in Ashford's study. Every word, every threat. The silence after she finished was heavy enough to crush bone. "Son of a—" Jack started. "Not in front of the baby," Sarah said automatically. "He's really going to do it." Caleb's voice was flat. "Actually going to burn us out." Or worse. Evelyn twisted her hands together. "I don't know if he meant the well poisoning literally, but he meant it." Jack stood and paced to the window. "Ashford doesn't make empty threats." "Why are you telling us this?" Sarah asked quietly. "You work for him. This could cost you everything." "I know." Evelyn met her eyes. "I know what it costs. But I can't just stand by and let him—" She stopped, unsure how to finish. "You're risking your position for people you barely know," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Why?" Evelyn thought about her beautiful room with its running water, about the salary that could pay her father's debts, about the security she'd traveled so far to find. "Because it's wrong," she said simply. "What he's doing is wrong, and if I stay silent, I'm part of it." Mrs. Talbot made a sound that might have been approval. Sarah just looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "What do we do?" Jack asked. "Can't fight him legally. Don't have the money." "Could go to the territorial governor," Caleb suggested without much hope. "Who's friends with Ashford, who probably owns stock in half his businesses?" Jack shook his head. "We're on our own here." "Not entirely." Evelyn stood. "I still work for Ashford. I can hear things. Warn you if something's coming." "You'd spy for us?" Sarah asked. "I tell you the truth. There's a difference. Not to Ashford." Caleb moved to stand in front of her. "If he finds out you're helping us, he'll destroy you. Not just fire you, actually destroy you. Make sure you never work again, never find shelter again. He has that kind of reach." "I know. And you're willing to risk it anyway." Evelyn thought about Eleanor's cold smile, about dinners eaten alone in that enormous dining room, about feeling like a dressed-up doll, something pretty and lifeless. I've spent my whole life being sensible, she said, making safe choices, doing what I was supposed to do, and it got me exactly nowhere. Maybe it's time to try something different. Caleb looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Definitely both, Jack muttered, but there was respect in his voice. Sarah stood and walked over to Evelyn. Thank you for telling us, for risking this. Don't thank me yet. I haven't actually helped, just delivered bad news. You chose a side. That's more than most people would do. Evelyn stayed another hour, helping with lunch while they discussed what could be done. The options were limited and mostly terrible. Hire guards they couldn't afford, sleep in shifts, keep weapons close, wait for Ashford to make his move and hope they survived it. When she finally left, Caleb walked her to the carriage. You're going back there, he said, to his house. It's where I work. It's a den of wolves. I'm aware. She climbed into the carriage seat, gathering the reins. But wolves don't expect sheep to have teeth. Might give me an advantage. Miss Mercer. He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. Be careful. Please. The please broke something in her chest. I will. She drove back toward town, then to Ashford's estate, arriving just before sunset like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just committed treason against her employer. Like her whole life hadn't shifted on its axis. That night, eating dinner alone in the enormous dining room, Evelyn felt different. Lighter, somehow, despite the danger. For the first time since leaving Boston, she'd made a choice that wasn't about survival or debt or what she was supposed to do. She'd chosen based on what was right. It might destroy her. Probably would destroy her. But at least she'd made the choice herself. The telegram arrived 3 weeks later, delivered by a boy who couldn't have been more than 14. Evelyn was in the schoolroom watching Margaret butcher a perfectly simple arithmetic problem when one of the servants appeared at the door. For you, Miss Mercer. The servant's face was carefully blank, but something in her eyes looked like warning. Evelyn took the envelope. The boy who'd delivered it was already gone. She turned it over, saw the official stamp from the Territorial Education Board, and her stomach dropped. What is it? Eleanor asked, that predatory interest sharpening her voice. Nothing that concerns you. Continue your work. She waited until the children were occupied before opening it. The words swam for a moment, then settled into focus. Position available. Teaching post. Settlement of Cedar Falls. Immediate start required. Salary modest but guaranteed. Interested candidates should apply in person. It wasn't signed, but at the bottom, in handwriting she recognized from Blackthorn Ranch, someone had added, "They need you more than he does." Evelyn's hand shook as she folded the telegram and slipped it into her pocket. Cedar Falls was the struggling town near Blackthorn Ranch, the place that barely had enough families to justify a school. Someone had arranged this, someone who knew she needed a way out. That evening, she requested another meeting with Ashford. He kept her waiting 20 minutes before allowing her into his study, a calculated reminder of who held power. What is it, Miss Mercer? I'm quite busy. I've received a teaching offer, a proper school position in Cedar Falls. He didn't look up from his papers. And you're telling me this why? Professional courtesy. I wanted to give you notice before accepting. Now he looked up, and the expression on his face made ice run down her spine. You believe you can simply leave, after everything I've invested in you? I'm a governess, Mr. Ashford, not property. You're an employee with obligations. He set down his pen with deliberate care. I took you in when you were desperate, provided you with shelter, food, a generous salary, and now you want to abandon your position for some pathetic frontier school? The children would benefit from someone who actually wants to teach them. The children are irrelevant. His voice went cold. This is about control, Miss Mercer. I don't appreciate people breaking agreements. There was no contract, no legal obligation to stay beyond legal. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think legality matters out here? I could destroy you with a word. Make sure no one in this territory ever hires you again. Make sure those debts you're running from find you no matter where you hide. Evelyn felt her courage wavering, but forced herself to stand straight. Is that a threat? It's a fact. You work for me until I decide otherwise. He returned to his papers, dismissing her. You may go. And Miss Mercer? Forget about Cedar Falls. You won't be going there. She left the study on legs that barely held her weight. Back in her room, she stared at the telegram until the words blurred. This was what Caleb had warned her about. Ashford didn't just fire people. He destroyed them. But the alternative was staying here, living in this beautiful cage, watching him crush everyone who stood in his way. She made her decision before dawn. The next morning, she packed her carpet bag with the few possessions she actually owned. Everything else, the expensive dresses, the fancy toiletries, all the trappings Ashford had provided, she left behind. They'd never really been hers anyway. She was halfway down the stairs when Eleanor appeared at the top landing. "You're leaving." Not a question. The girl had inherited her father's talent for reading people. "Yes. He'll ruin you for this." "Probably." Eleanor studied her with those cold eyes. Why? Why throw away everything for a stupid school in a stupid town? Evelyn thought about how to answer, then decided Eleanor deserved honesty. "Because staying here was making me into someone I don't want to be. Someone like your father. My father is powerful, respected. Your father is cruel and lonely, and so obsessed with control that he'll burn families out of their homes just to prove he can." Evelyn shifted the carpet bag to her other hand. "You can admire that if you want. I choose not to." She left before Eleanor could respond, walking out the front door into morning air that tasted like freedom. The settlement of Cedar Falls consisted of one main street, a dozen buildings that looked like they'd been thrown together during a hurry, and a schoolhouse that had seen better days. Much better days. Possibly in a previous century. The woman waiting outside it looked like she'd also seen better days. Maybe 50 years old, weathered by hard living, wearing a dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible. "You Miss Mercer?" "Yes. Are you—" "Ruth Campbell, town council, such as it is." She gestured at the schoolhouse. "This is what we've got. I won't lie and say it's much." It wasn't. The roof sagged in the middle. Windows were cracked. Inside smelled like mold and mouse droppings. A stove sat in the corner, rusty and probably dangerous. Desks were scattered around like someone had given up halfway through arranging them. "How many students?" Evelyn asked, trying to keep dismay out of her voice. "Had 12 before the last teacher quit, probably down to 8 now. Families pulled their kids when there was no one to teach." "Why did the last teacher leave?" Ruth's expression went carefully neutral. "Same reason as the 3 before that. Pressure. From Ashford. Didn't say his name, but yes." Ruth walked to one of the desks and ran her finger through the dust. "He doesn't like this town. We're too close to Blackthorn Ranch, too willing to trade with the Graysons. He's been trying to strangle us for years. Running off teachers is part of that." "And you think I'll stay when the others didn't?" "Honestly, no." Ruth turned to face her. "I think you'll last maybe a month before you realize this job doesn't pay enough to fight a man like Ashford. But that telegram said you might be different. Said you already knew what you were walking into." "Who sent it?" "Caleb Grayson. Rode into town 3 days ago, paid the telegraph operator, told us a teacher might be coming who actually had a spine." Ruth's eyes were sharp. "Question is, does she?" Evelyn looked around the terrible schoolhouse with its broken windows and uncertain future. Thought about the comfortable room she'd left behind, the security, the salary that could have paid her father's debts. "I guess we'll find out," she said. The first week was brutal. Evelyn slept in a room above the general store that was barely warmer than outside. She ate whatever Ruth's husband could spare from their farm. She spent every daylight hour trying to make the schoolhouse habitable, scrubbing floors, patching windows with whatever materials she could find, wrestling the stove into something that might actually produce heat. 8 children showed up that first Monday. They ranged from 6 to 14, wore clothes that had been patched and repatched, and looked at Evelyn with the skepticism of people who'd learned not to trust promises. "You gonna leave too?" The oldest boy, name of Jacob, asked it flat out. "I'm gonna try not to." "That's what the others said." "Then I guess you'll have to wait and see if I'm lying." She wasn't a good teacher at first. The children had different skill levels, different needs, and Evelyn had been trained to educate wealthy kids who already knew their letters. These children were starting from scratch, or close to it. But she learned. And more importantly, she didn't leave. The second week, 2 more families sent their children. The third week, another 3. By the end of the month, she had 16 students crammed into the tiny schoolhouse, all of them watching her with something that might have been hope. That's when Ashford struck. The lawsuit papers were delivered on a Tuesday, handed to her by a man in a suit that cost more than the entire schoolhouse. The language was dense and legal, but the meaning was clear. Richard Ashford was suing Evelyn Mercer for breach of contract, emotional damages to his children, theft of educational materials, and defamation of character. The amount he was claiming was staggering, $15,000, the exact amount of her father's debts. "That's not a coincidence," Ruth said when Evelyn showed her the papers. They were sitting in Ruth's kitchen, the lawsuit spread across the table like a death sentence. He knew exactly what number would hurt most. "I don't have $15,000. I don't have $1,500. Evelyn's hands were shaking. "Even if I worked for 10 years, I couldn't." "He doesn't want the money. He wants you gone." Ruth poured coffee with steady hands. "Wants to prove that crossing him has consequences." "It's working. Maybe. Or maybe you fight." "With what? I can't afford a lawyer, can't afford anything." The enormity of it was crushing. "He's gonna win, and I'm going to lose everything." "You already lost everything when you left his house." Ruth pushed the coffee toward her. "Difference is, now you get to choose what you do with nothing." The lawsuit became public knowledge within days. Ashford made sure of that, sending copies to every business in town, every family with children in the school. The message was clear. This is what happens to people who defy me. The first family pulled their children on Wednesday, 2 more on Thursday. By Friday, Evelyn was down to 9 students, and she could see fear in the eyes of the parents who still sent their kids. She couldn't blame them. Ashford had made it clear that association with her was dangerous. Anyone who supported her risked his wrath, and most of these families were already hanging on by their fingernails. On Saturday, someone threw a rock through the schoolhouse window. The note wrapped around it was brief. "Leave while you still can." Evelyn was sweeping up the glass when Caleb appeared in the doorway. "Heard what happened?" He took the broom from her hands and finished the job himself. "You all right?" "Define all right." "Still breathing, still standing." "Then I suppose I'm all right." She sat on one of the desks, exhaustion making her bones feel like lead. "Though I'm not sure for how long." He leaned the broom against the wall and came to sit beside her. "Ashford's trying to scare you off." "It's working." "Is it?" Evelyn looked at the broken window, at the pathetic schoolhouse that was somehow still standing despite everything. "I don't know. Part of me wants to run, go back east, hide, pretend this never happened." "And the other part?" "Is furious." The anger surprised her with its intensity. "I did nothing wrong. I taught his children, fulfilled my obligations, and left when the position became intolerable. And now he's trying to destroy me for it." "Welcome to how the rest of us live." Caleb's voice was dry. "Ashford doesn't need you to do something wrong. He just needs you to be in his way." "How do you stand it, knowing he's coming for you and there's nothing you can do to stop him?" "Who says there's nothing we can do?" He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the settlement. "We can fight. Might lose, probably will lose, but at least we go down swinging." "That's not much of a strategy." "It's the only one we've got." He turned back to her. "Question is, are you with us or not?" Evelyn thought about Eleanor's cold smile, about dinners in that enormous dining room, about the beautiful cage she'd escaped. "I'm with you," she said, "for whatever that's worth." "It's worth more than you think." The following week, armed men started appearing on the road between Cedar Falls and Blackthorn Ranch. They didn't do anything overtly threatening, just sat on their horses watching anyone who passed. The message was clear. "We're watching. We know where you go." Evelyn recognized one of them, Morrison, the man from Ashford's study, the one who'd been given instructions about burned barns and poisoned wells. She started varying her route to the schoolhouse, taking different paths, never falling into a predictable pattern. It was exhausting and probably pointless, but it made her feel slightly less like a sitting target. The trial date was set for 6 weeks out, in Helena, the territorial capital. Evelyn would need to travel there, would need to defend herself against Ashford's lawyers, would need to do all of this with no money and no legal representation. "There might be someone who could help," Ruth said one evening. They were in the schoolhouse, Evelyn grading papers by lamplight while Ruth mended a torn primer. "Lawyer named Catherine Hayes, practices in Helena. She's got a reputation for taking cases other lawyers won't touch. I can't afford. She works on contingency sometimes, meaning she only gets paid if you win. And what are the chances of winning against Ashford? Ruth's silence was answer enough. But desperation made people foolish, so Evelyn wrote to Catherine Hayes anyway. She laid out the whole situation, the position at Ashford's estate, the discovery of his plans for Blackthorn Ranch, her decision to leave, the lawsuit that followed. She tried to make it sound less pathetic than it felt. The response came 10 days later. Miss Mercer, your case is legally weak, financially ruinous, and politically suicidal. Ashford has money, influence, and a track record of destroying anyone who crosses him. I'll take it. Meet me in Helena 1 week before the trial. Bring every document you have, and be prepared to have your entire life examined in public. Ashford won't fight fair, which means we can't either. Regards, Catherine Hayes, attorney at law. Evelyn read the letter 3 times, trying to convince herself this was real. Someone was willing to fight for her. Someone who knew the odds and didn't care. She showed the letter to Caleb the next time he came to town. He read it carefully, then handed it back. This Hayes woman, she any good? According to Ruth, she's won cases everyone said were impossible. Everyone also says fighting Ashford is impossible. I know. Evelyn folded the letter carefully. But at least I won't be fighting alone. The weeks before the trial crawled past like wounded animals. Evelyn taught her remaining students, ignored the armed men watching from the road, and tried not to think about what would happen if she lost. When she lost. The distinction felt meaningless. 3 days before she was supposed to leave for Helena, the barn at Blackthorn Ranch burned. Evelyn heard about it from Jacob, who'd heard it from his father, who'd seen the smoke from their farm. By the time she rode out there, the barn was mostly ash, and the Graysons were standing in the wreckage looking like they'd aged 10 years overnight. Everyone all right? She asked, climbing down from the horse Ruth had loaned her. We're fine. Animals are fine. Got them out in time. Jack's voice was hollow. But the hay's gone. The feed. Everything we stored for winter. How did it start? Take a guess. Sarah was holding Thomas, who was crying from all the smoke and chaos. Happened at 2 a.m. Whole thing went up at once, like it was set. You see anyone? Saw riders leaving, too dark to identify them. Caleb kicked at a piece of charred wood. But we know who sent them. Evelyn looked at the destruction, at the Graysons' exhausted faces, at the proof that Ashford's threats weren't empty. This is because of me, because I told you what he was planning. This is because Ashford's a bastard who burns people's property when he doesn't get his way. Jack's voice was hard. Don't take his sins on yourself. But if you hadn't warned us, we might have been sleeping in that barn. Sarah shifted Thomas to her other hip. Could have been all of us burning instead of just hay. The thought made Evelyn's stomach turn. What will you do? Without feed for the winter? Buy what we can. Ration the rest. Pray the cattle can survive on whatever grass they can find under the snow. Caleb's jaw was tight. We've been through worse. Have you? He looked at her for a long moment. No, but we'll get through this anyway. Don't have much choice. That night, Evelyn lay awake in her room above the general store, staring at the ceiling and wondering how many people would suffer because she'd decided to have a conscience. The Graysons had lost their barn. The families in Cedar Falls were living in fear, and she was dragging all of them into a fight against a man who would burn their lives down without hesitation. Maybe the sensible thing was to surrender, except that she couldn't win, leave the territory, let everyone else return to their lives without her as a target on their backs. But morning came, and she was still there, still teaching her students, still preparing for a trial she'd probably lose, still refusing to give Ashford what he wanted. The journey to Helena took 2 days by stagecoach. Evelyn spent most of it watching the landscape roll past and trying not to vomit from nerves. Ruth had given her money for lodging, cobbled together from what various families could spare. It was enough for 3 nights in a boarding house that made her previous accommodations in Boston look palatial. Catherine Hayes turned out to be nothing like Evelyn expected. She was younger, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and ink stains on her fingers. Her office was crammed with legal books and papers stacked in precarious towers. Miss Mercer, sit. She gestured at a chair that was mostly clear. Tell me everything. Start start from when you first contacted Ashford about the position. Evelyn talked for 2 hours. Catherine took notes in handwriting that looked like code, occasionally asking questions that felt like knife cuts, precise and designed to expose weakness. "So you have no written contract," Catherine said when Evelyn finished. "No documentation of your employment terms beyond his initial letters." "That's correct." "Which means his breach of contract claim is built on air." Catherine flipped through her notes. "Good. That's the weakest part of his case. Then why is he pursuing it?" "Because the goal isn't to win legally, it's to destroy you financially. Even if he loses the case, you'll be buried under legal costs. He knows that. He's counting on it." Catherine set down her pen. "Unless we can prove malicious prosecution, show that he filed this lawsuit knowing it was baseless, purely to punish you for leaving his employment." "Can we prove that?" "Maybe. If we can establish a pattern of behavior. Other employees he's targeted. Other people he's destroyed for crossing him." Catherine's expression was grim. "It won't be easy. Ashford spent years building a reputation as a respected businessman. We'll need to tear that down in front of a judge who probably plays cards with him." "So we're going to lose?" "Probably. But we might do enough damage on the way down that he thinks twice before doing this to someone else." Catherine smiled, and it was fierce. "And who knows? Sometimes juries surprise you." The trial started on a Monday morning in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and older ambitions. The judge was a man named Whitmore, 60 years old and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. The jury was 12 men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else too. Ashford sat at the plaintiff's table with 2 lawyers who wore suits expensive enough to pay Evelyn's salary for a year. He looked confident, comfortable, like this was merely a formality before inevitable victory. Evelyn sat next to Catherine and tried not to shake. The first day was mostly procedural, opening statements, establishing the basic facts. Ashford's lawyers painted Evelyn as an ungrateful woman who'd abandoned her obligations, stolen educational materials, and spread lies about their client's character. Catherine's opening was shorter. "My client fulfilled her employment obligations and left when the position became untenable. Everything that followed is simply a powerful man punishing someone for having the audacity to say no." The second day, Ashford took the stand. He was a good witness, controlled and careful. He talked about hiring Evelyn in good faith, providing generous accommodations, only to have her abandon his children without notice. "Did Miss Mercer give any reason for her departure?" his lawyer asked. "She claimed the position wasn't suitable. I offered to adjust her responsibilities, but she refused." Ashford's voice was measured, reasonable. "It was quite distressing for the children." "Objection." Catherine stood. "The emotional state of Mr. Ashford's children is not relevant to whether a contract was breached." "Sustained," Judge Whitmore said, sounding bored. Catherine's cross-examination was surgical. "Mr. Ashford, did you have a written employment contract with Miss Mercer?" "We had an understanding." "That's not what I asked. Did you have a written contract, yes or no?" A pause. "No. So Miss Mercer's employment was at will. She could leave at any time for any reason." "Legally, perhaps, but morally, we're in a court of law, Mr. Ashford, not a church. Morality isn't what we're here to determine." Catherine paced in front of the witness stand. "You claim Miss Mercer stole educational materials. Can you itemize what was stolen? Books, supplies, things she'd been given for teaching purposes." "Can you name a single specific item?" Ashford's jaw tightened. "It's been several months. I don't recall every quote. So you can't actually prove anything was stolen. You're simply claiming it must have been." Catherine smiled. "Let's move on. You also claim defamation of character. What specifically did Miss Mercer say that was false?" "She told people I was involved in illegal land acquisition." "Are you involved in land disputes, Mr. Ashford?" "I have legitimate business interests. Yes or no? Are you currently pursuing a legal claim against a property known as Blackthorn Ranch?" The courtroom went very quiet. Ashford's lawyers looked uncomfortable. "I am," Ashford said carefully. "But that's a completely separate matter." "Is it?" "Because it seems quite relevant that you're suing an employee who became aware of your business practices and objected to them." Catherine turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce evidence regarding Mr. Ashford's pattern of behavior toward employees and business competitors." Ashford's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. Mr. Ashford's other business dealings are not relevant to this case. They're directly relevant if they establish malicious intent. Catherine's voice was steel. My client left his employment after discovering he was planning to use intimidation and violence against a ranching family. The lawsuit that followed was retaliation, pure and simple. Judge Whitmore looked between them, clearly weighing political calculation against legal principle. I'll allow limited evidence, but keep it focused, Miss Hayes. The next 3 days were a blur of testimony. Catherine brought in former employees of Ashford's who testified about being fired for minor infractions, then blacklisted from working anywhere in the territory. She brought in business owners who'd lost contracts after refusing to sell their property to him. She brought in a banker who testified, reluctantly, that Ashford had used his influence to deny loans to people he considered enemies. Piece by piece, she built a picture of a man who used wealth and power like weapons. Ashford's lawyers fought back hard. They brought in character witnesses who praised his philanthropy, his contributions to the territory's development, his standing in the community. They painted Evelyn as a bitter woman looking for someone to blame for her own failures. On the 8th day, Evelyn took the stand. Ashford's lawyer circled like a shark. Miss Mercer, you left Boston to escape your father's debts, correct? I left to find employment, yes. Because creditors were pursuing you for $15,000 your father owed when he died. Heat crept up her neck. Yes. And isn't it convenient that you're now claiming Mr. Ashford owes you damages? Seems like a convenient way to resolve your debt problem. I'm not claiming he owes me anything. I'm defending myself against a baseless lawsuit. A lawsuit you claim is baseless, despite abandoning your position without notice, taking materials that didn't belong to you, and spreading false accusations about my client. I took nothing that wasn't mine, and the accusations weren't false. You claim to have overheard a conversation about Blackthorn Ranch, a conversation you were eavesdropping on, violating my client's privacy in his own home. I heard him planning violence against innocent people. Was I supposed to ignore that? You were supposed to mind your own business, Miss Mercer, like any employee should. The lawyer's voice was sharp. Instead, you inserted yourself into matters you didn't understand, made wild accusations, and now you're trying to paint yourself as some kind of moral crusader. Catherine objected. The judge sustained. But the damage was done. By the time Evelyn stepped down, she felt like she'd been flayed alive. The closing arguments happened on day 9. Ashford's lawyers argued that employment relationships required trust, and Evelyn had violated that trust. They argued that damages were justified to compensate for the disruption she'd caused. Catherine argued that no contract meant no breach, that the lawsuit was nothing more than retaliation, and that allowing it to stand would give powerful men license to destroy anyone who dared to defy them. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, Evelyn couldn't read their faces. Judge Whitmore cleared his throat. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The foreman stood, holding a piece of paper. In the matter of Ashford versus Mercer, we find in favor of the defendant on all counts. Relief hit Evelyn so hard she almost fell out of her chair. Catherine grabbed her arm, steadying her. However, the foreman continued, the jury believes both parties contributed to this situation and recommends they settle any remaining financial disputes between themselves. Ashford's face had gone stony. His lawyers were already whispering urgently in his ears. Judge Whitmore banged his gavel. The verdict is entered. Miss Mercer, you're free to go. He looked directly at Ashford. And Mr. Ashford, I suggest you choose your battles more carefully in the future. Outside the courtroom, Catherine was practically vibrating. We won! We actually won! The jury said we both contributed, but they said that to save face. They found in your favor. That's what matters. Catherine grabbed her shoulders. You beat Richard Ashford in court. Do you understand how rare that is? Evelyn was trying to process it when Ashford emerged from the courthouse, flanked by his lawyers. He looked at her across the steps, and the hatred in his eyes was pure and cold. He crossed toward them. Catherine stepped forward, but Ashford ignored her, focusing entirely on Evelyn. You won today, he said quietly. Congratulations. But this isn't over. You still owe legal costs, filing fees, expert witnesses. My lawyers will make sure you pay every penny. Your lawyers just lost. I'm not paying them anything. The judgment says you're not liable for damages. It doesn't cover your own legal costs. His smile was poison. Miss Hayes works on contingency for the lawsuit itself, but all those other expenses, those are yours. I'd estimate around $5,000, maybe more. Evelyn's stomach dropped. She looked at Catherine, who'd gone pale. We can fight that, Catherine started. Please do. It'll just add to the costs. Ashford adjusted his cuffs. I told you I'd destroy you, Miss Mercer. The only question was how long it would take. He walked away, leaving Evelyn standing on the courthouse steps, feeling like she'd won the battle and lost the war. Catherine was silent for a long moment. Then, we'll figure something out. How? I don't have $5,000. I don't have $500. I know, but Catherine stopped. I'll reduce my contingency fee, and we can negotiate with the court on payment terms. For how long? 10 years? 20? Evelyn felt the fight draining out of her. He was right. He destroyed me anyway. He didn't destroy you. You're standing here. You're free. Free and bankrupt. Wonderful. It's more than most people get when they fight him. Catherine's voice was fierce. You won, Evelyn. In the way that actually matters, you won. Don't let him take that from you. But walking away from the courthouse that day, debt hanging over her head like a noose, Evelyn wasn't sure what winning was supposed to feel like. This feeling, exhausted, afraid, uncertain, this didn't feel like victory. It felt like she'd just started a fight that might never end. The meeting with Catherine's accountant happened in a cramped office that smelled like old paper and defeat. Numbers covered the desk in neat columns, each one representing money Evelyn didn't have. $5,218. The accountant, a thin man named Porter, tapped the final sum with his pencil. That's filing fees, court costs, witness expenses, document preparation, and expert testimony fees. Miss Hayes has waived her contingency, which helps, but the court expenses are non-negotiable. Evelyn stared at the number until it stopped looking like anything. How long do I have? Officially, 30 days, but we can request extensions, set up a payment plan. Porter glanced at Catherine. Realistically, you're looking at monthly payments for the next 8 to 10 years, assuming you can find steady employment. At a teaching salary in Cedar Falls, that's most of her income gone, Catherine said. She'll barely survive. Then she'll need to find additional work. Porter's voice wasn't unkind, just factual. Or negotiate a settlement with Ashford's legal team. Ashford won't settle. He wants her destroyed. Catherine stood and paced to the window. There has to be another option. There isn't. These are the numbers. They don't negotiate. Porter gathered his papers. I'm sorry, Miss Mercer. I wish I had better news. After he left, Evelyn and Catherine sat in silence. Through the window, Helena looked like any other frontier town. Muddy streets, buildings that barely stood straight, people moving through their lives like everything was fine. I could fight the fees, Catherine said finally. Argue they're excessive, file motions to reduce them. Might buy you time. And cost more money I don't have. Evelyn felt hollowed out. No, I'll figure something out. Pay what I can, when I can. For 10 years. If that's what it takes. Catherine turned from the window. You know what the worst part is? Ashford planned this. He knew even if he lost the case, the costs would bury you. That's why he dragged it out for 9 days instead of settling. Every day in court was more money you'd owe. So he won after all. He thinks he did. But he made a mistake. Catherine's expression was sharp. He exposed himself. All those witnesses we called, all that testimony about his business practices, that's public record now. Other people he's crushed, other families he's destroyed. It's all documented. How does that help me? Maybe it doesn't, but it might help the next person who fights him. Catherine sat back down. And it definitely helps the Graysons. Their land dispute case just got a lot stronger with all this evidence about Ashford's methods. Evelyn hadn't thought about that. Will they use it? If they're smart. Which means they'll need a lawyer. Catherine smiled. Lucky for them, I'm suddenly very interested in their case. The ride back to Cedar Falls took 3 days. Evelyn spent most of it doing math in her head, trying to figure out how to survive on whatever pittance was left after paying her debts. The numbers never worked out right. Ruth met her at the edge of town, took one look at her face and said, That bad? I won the case. I'm still ruined. Evelyn climbed down from the stagecoach, every muscle aching. $5,000 in legal costs, 10 years of payments. Well, Could be worse. How? You could be dead. Or you could have never fought at all. Ruth grabbed her bag. Come on, town's been waiting to hear what happened. The schoolhouse was full when they arrived. Not just parents, everyone. Farmers, shopkeepers, people Evelyn barely recognized. They'd lit lamps against the gathering dark, and the warm light made the terrible building look almost welcoming. Jacob stood when she entered. Did you win? Yes and no. Evelyn set her bag down. The jury found in my favor. Ashford lost the lawsuit, but the legal costs, her voice cracked. I'll be paying them off for the next decade. Silence. Then someone in the back started clapping. Others joined. Within seconds, the whole room was applauding like she'd accomplished something actually worth celebrating. You beat him, Jacob said. In court. Nobody does that. I didn't beat him. You stood up to the most powerful man in Montana and didn't back down. This from an older man Evelyn vaguely recognized as someone's father. That's winning in my book. Damn right, Ruth's voice carried. And since you're stuck here for the next 10 years paying off those debts, guess that means we've got ourselves a permanent teacher. Laughter, genuine and warm. Evelyn felt something crack in her chest. I can't. The debt is too much. I'll need other work just to eat. Then we'll find you other work. A woman stepped forward, someone Evelyn had seen at the general store. I need help with mending 3 days a week. Pay isn't much, but it's something. I could use help with bookkeeping, another voice called. Few hours here and there. My wife's been wanting someone to teach her to read, a third man added. I'd pay for lessons. One by one, people offered what they could. Work, food, a slightly better room above the store. None of it was much. All of it together might actually be enough. Evelyn stood there trying not to cry while these people, most of them as poor as she was, figured out how to keep her alive. Why? She managed finally. Why would you do this for me? Because you did it for us. Ruth's voice was matter of fact. You could have stayed at Ashford's estate, kept your head down, collected your salary. Instead, you walked away and stood up for people you barely knew. That means something. It means you're stuck with us now, Jacob added, grinning. That night, alone in her room above the store, Evelyn looked at the list of jobs people had offered. The math still didn't quite work. She'd be exhausted, constantly scrambling, living on the edge of survival. But it was possible. Barely. She thought about the alternative, going back east, disappearing, letting Ashford win completely. The idea made her physically ill, so instead she started planning. Which days she'd teach, which days she'd mend or keep books or give reading lessons. How to stretch what little money she'd have. How to survive 10 years of this without losing her mind. It looked impossible on paper. But then again, so had fighting Ashford in court. The next morning, she was preparing the day's lessons when Caleb appeared at the schoolhouse door. Heard you made it back. He looked uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure what to say. Catherine Hayes sent word about the trial. Did she also mention the $5,000 in debt? She did, along with a request to represent us in the land dispute case. He stepped inside, ducking slightly under the low door frame. Using evidence from your trial. Will you accept? Already did. Can't afford her either, but she says she'll work contingency on that too. He moved to one of the desks, ran his hand over the scarred wood. Strange feeling, having someone fight for us who actually knows what they're doing. Strange feeling being worth fighting for, Evelyn said quietly. He looked at her. You always were. You just didn't know it yet. Heat crept up her neck. Catherine thinks the evidence will help your case? Maybe. Ashford's lawyers are already trying to get it excluded, but she's confident. He paused. There's something else. The barn that burned. Ashford's man Morrison was arrested yesterday. Someone came forward who saw him near our property that night. Recognized his horse. He'll talk his way out of it. Ashford will make sure. Probably, but it's on record now. Another piece of evidence that he uses violence to get what he wants. Caleb's jaw was tight. Catherine says if we can establish a pattern, show the court that Ashford has been terrorizing us for years, we might actually have a chance. And if you lose? Then we lose the ranch, lose everything, and start over somewhere else. His voice was flat. But at least we'll know we fought. Evelyn thought about her own fight, about 10 years of debt and constant struggle. Is it worth it? Fighting when you'll probably lose anyway? You tell me. You just spent 9 days in court defending yourself against a baseless lawsuit. Was that worth it? She thought about Ashford's face when the verdict was read, about the jury finding in her favor, about standing in this schoolhouse with people who'd offered to help her survive. Yes, she said. It was worth it. Then you have your answer. The weeks that followed were brutal. Evelyn taught every morning, mended clothes 3 afternoons a week, kept books for the general store on Thursdays, and gave reading lessons to anyone who could pay on weekends. She fell into bed exhausted every night and woke up exhausted every morning. But the school grew. Word spread that Cedar Falls had a teacher who wouldn't run, and families started sending their children from farther out. 20 students became 25, then 30. The schoolhouse was too small, so they held overflow classes outside when weather permitted. Evelyn wasn't a great teacher yet, but she was getting better. She learned to work with different ages simultaneously, to recognize when students were struggling versus when they were just being difficult, to make lessons interesting enough that kids actually paid attention. Jacob turned out to have a gift for mathematics. Margaret, not Ashford's daughter, a different Margaret from a farming family, could read anything put in front of her after just a few months. Even the youngest students, the 6-year-olds who could barely sit still, started recognizing letters and forming words. It wasn't the refined education Evelyn had been trained to provide. It was rougher, more practical, focused on skills these children would actually use. But it mattered. She could see it mattering. 2 months after the trial, Catherine sent word that the Graysons' case had a hearing date. 4 months out, also in Helena. She'd filed motions to include evidence from Evelyn's trial, and Ashford's lawyers were fighting it hard. They're scared, Catherine wrote. Ashford's used to crushing people before cases get to court. The fact that we're actually getting a hearing means we're doing something right. Evelyn showed the letter to Ruth, who read it carefully. 4 months, Ruth said. That's enough time for Ashford to cause more trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind where people get hurt. Ruth handed back the letter. He's already lost 1 court case and had one of his men arrested. He's not going to just sit back and let the Graysons have their day in court too. She was right. 3 weeks later, Blackthorn Ranch's water supply turned foul. The well that had served the property for 20 years suddenly tasted like chemicals and made anyone who drank from it violently sick. Caleb rode into town looking like he'd aged 10 years. Someone poisoned it, dumped something down the well in the middle of the night. Can you prove it? Evelyn asked. Can I prove someone deliberately poisoned our water supply? No. Can I prove the timing is awfully convenient right before our court case? Also no. He slumped against the schoolhouse wall. We're hauling water from the creek now. It's 2 miles each way. Takes half the day just to get enough for the animals. What about drinking water? Ruth's been letting us fill barrels from the town pump, but that's not sustainable long term. He looked exhausted. Catherine says we can add the well poisoning to the evidence, but again, can't prove it was Ashford's doing. Everyone knows it was. Knowing and proving are different things. Courts care about proof. Evelyn thought about that, about the impossibility of proving things done in darkness by men with enough money to cover their tracks. There has to be something we can do. Keep hauling water, keep working, keep breathing until the hearing. Caleb pushed off from the wall. Same thing we've always done. But the attacks continued, fences cut, allowing cattle to wander off, equipment sabotaged, small fires set and put out before real damage was done, but clearly meant as warnings. Each incident was small enough to be dismissed as bad luck or frontier life. Together, they formed a pattern of deliberate harassment. Catherine documented everything, but even she admitted it might not be enough. Ashford's careful, she told Evelyn during one of her visits to Cedar Falls. He never gives orders directly. Never leaves evidence, just creates an atmosphere where his people know what he wants and make it happen. So he gets away with it. Maybe. Or maybe the jury sees through it. Catherine didn't sound convinced. The problem is we're asking 12 men to rule against one of the most powerful people in Montana. That's a lot to ask. The hearing date crept closer. Caleb spent more time in town meeting with Catherine, going over documents and testimony. Sarah stayed at the ranch with Jack and Thomas, managing the endless work while fighting exhaustion and fear. Evelyn visited when she could, bringing food from the general store's donations, helping with whatever needed doing. The ranch was barely holding together. Makeshift repairs everywhere. Animals that looked underfed, buildings that needed work no one had time to do. How much longer can you last like this? She asked Sarah one afternoon while they were washing clothes in water hauled from the creek. As long as we have to. Sarah scrubbed at a stain with vicious determination. What else are we going to do? Give up? Hand Ashford the ranch and say he was right to terrorize us? I'm not suggesting you give up. I'm asking if you're okay. Sarah's hand stilled. No, I'm not okay. I'm terrified and exhausted and angry all the time. Thomas won't sleep through the night anymore because he picks up on how stressed I am. Jack's working himself to death trying to keep the ranch running with half the resources we need. And Caleb, her voice broke. Caleb hasn't smiled in months, just walks around looking like he's waiting for the next disaster. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be useful. Sarah returned to scrubbing. You're useful, actually. More than you know. Caleb talks about you sometimes. Heat flooded Evelyn's face. What does he say? That you're tougher than you look, that you could have run a dozen times and didn't, that fighting Ashford took real courage. Sarah glanced at her. He doesn't give compliments lightly. It wasn't courage. I just couldn't stand by and do nothing. That's what courage is. Doing the thing that scares you because it's right. Sarah wrung out the shirt she'd been washing. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Glad you chose us over Ashford's money. I didn't choose you. I chose not to be the kind of person who works for men like him. Same thing, really. The day before the Graysons' hearing, Ashford himself appeared in Cedar Falls. Evelyn was in the schoolhouse, dismissing students for the day, when she saw him through the window. He stood in the middle of the street like he owned it, flanked by two men she didn't recognize. Expensive suits, cold eyes. She sent the children home quickly and stepped outside. Ashford smiled when he saw her. Miss Mercer. Still teaching, I see. What do you want? I wanted to see how you were managing with all that debt. He glanced around the shabby settlement with obvious disdain. This is quite a step down from my estate. Is there a point to this visit? Several points, actually. He moved closer, his men staying a respectful distance behind. First, I wanted you to know that your little victory in court cost me nothing but pride. I've already recouped my legal expenses through business deals you'll never hear about. Meanwhile, you're teaching in a building that should be condemned while working 3 jobs to pay off debts that will follow you for years. I'm aware of my situation. Are you also aware that the Graysons' case will fail? That Catherine Hayes is wasting everyone's time with evidence that won't hold up? His voice was pleasant, conversational. The judge assigned to the case is Judge Morrison. No relation to my employee, just an unfortunate coincidence. But Judge Morrison happens to owe certain people certain favors. The ruling is already decided. Evelyn felt sick. You fixed the case. I ensured justice would be served. The Graysons are squatters. They'll be recognized as such. He adjusted his cuffs. I'm telling you this as a courtesy, so you can prepare them for what's coming. Maybe convince them to accept the settlement I'll offer after they lose. It won't be generous, but it'll be something. They won't accept anything from you. Then they'll leave with nothing. Either way, I get the land. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Miss Mercer? Don't think about warning Catherine Hayes about the judge. She already knows the deck is stacked. She just hasn't told her clients how badly. He left. Evelyn stood frozen in the street, rage and helplessness warring in her chest. That night, she rode out to Blackthorn Ranch and told them everything. Caleb listened without expression. Sarah went pale. Jack started cursing and didn't stop for 5 minutes. So we've already lost, Sarah said finally, before we even get to court. Catherine knows, Evelyn said. She must have a plan. Or she's just going through the motions because she promised to fight. Caleb stood and walked to the window, staring out at the dark ranch. Ashford wins, like he always does. You don't know that. Yes, I do. I've known it for 3 years, maybe longer. His voice was hollow. The only question was how much it would cost us before the end came. So what do you want to do? Jack asked. Take his settlement? Walk away? And go where? Do what? Caleb turned from the window. This ranch is all we have. Our father built it. Our mother's buried here. This is our home. Then we fight, Sarah said. Even if we lose, even if it costs us everything, we don't give him the satisfaction of surrender. They left for Helena the next morning, Caleb, Jack, and Sarah with Thomas. Catherine met them at the courthouse steps, looking grimmer than Evelyn had ever seen her. "You heard about the judge," she said without preamble. "Evelyn told us." Caleb's voice was flat. "Is there anything we can do?" "Appeal if we lose, but that takes money you don't have." Catherine's jaw was tight. "I won't lie to you. This is going to be ugly. Ashford's lawyers will attack everything, your paperwork, your father's claims, your right to be here at all, and the judge will let them." "So why are we here?" Jack asked. "Because sometimes losing loudly is better than losing quietly. Because I want every detail of what Ashford's done to you on public record. And because—" she paused. "Because I'm furious, and I want to make him work for this victory." The courtroom was smaller than the one from Evelyn's trial. Judge Morrison was older than Whitmore, with eyes that looked dead and a mouth set in permanent disapproval. He barely glanced at the Graysons when they entered. Ashford sat at the plaintiff's table looking supremely confident. Why wouldn't he be? He'd already bought the outcome. The first day was worse than Catherine had warned. Ashford's lawyers tore apart every document the Graysons presented. Homestead papers were called into question. Property boundaries were disputed. Their father's original claim was painted as fraudulent. Judge Morrison sustained every objection Ashford's lawyers made and overruled most of Catherine's. The message was clear. This court belonged to Ashford. On the second day, Catherine called witnesses. People who'd known the Graysons' father, who'd seen him work the land, who could testify to his legitimate claim. The judge looked bored. Ashford's lawyers shredded their testimony with surgical precision. Then Catherine called Evelyn. She took the stand feeling like she was walking to an execution. Ashford's lead lawyer, a man named Rutherford, who wore smugness like cologne, approached with barely concealed glee. "Miss Mercer, we meet again?" He smiled. "You testified in your own trial a few months ago. Did quite well, as I recall. Jury found in your favor." "That's correct." "And yet you're still here, still in Montana, still working as a teacher in a frontier settlement. Why is that?" "Because I choose to be." "Or because the legal debts from that trial left you with nowhere else to go?" Rutherford's voice was sharp. $5,000 in court costs, I believe. Must be quite a burden." "Objection," Catherine said. "Relevance?" "I'm establishing bias, Your Honor. Miss Mercer has financial motivations to testify against my client." Judge Morrison barely looked up. "Overruled. Answer the question, Miss Mercer." Evelyn met Rutherford's eyes. "Yes, I have debts. They don't change what I heard in Ashford's study or what I witnessed at Blackthorn Ranch." "What you claim to have heard. During a private conversation you were eavesdropping on." Rutherford paced in front of the witness stand. "A conversation about business matters you couldn't possibly understand." "I understood threats of violence clearly enough. Or you misunderstood business discussion, and motivated by your own grudge against Mr. Ashford, twisted his words into something sinister." He stopped pacing. "Tell me, Miss Mercer, how much are the Graysons paying you to testify today?" "Nothing." "Really? No money changing hands? No promises of future compensation?" "None." "How convenient. And we're simply supposed to believe you're here out of the goodness of your heart?" Rutherford's voice dripped sarcasm. "A woman buried in debt, testifying against the man responsible for that debt, and we're to believe there's no ulterior motive?" Catherine objected again. Morrison overruled again. The pattern was exhausting. When Evelyn finally stepped down, she felt like she'd been beaten. Catherine gave her a look that said she'd done well, but it didn't feel like enough. The third day, Catherine played her final card. She called Morrison, Ashford's employee, the one who'd been arrested for the barn burning, as a hostile witness. Morrison sat in the witness stand looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He was still awaiting trial on the arson charges, and his lawyer had clearly told him to say as little as possible. "Mr. Morrison," Catherine began, "you work for Richard Ashford, correct?" "I do jobs for various people, but Mr. Ashford is your primary employer, yes or no?" "Yes." "And you were arrested 3 months ago for burning the barn at Blackthorn Ranch." "I was arrested, haven't been convicted of anything." "But you were near Blackthorn Ranch the night the barn burned. A witness placed you there." "I'm near lots of places. Doesn't mean I burned them." Morrison's voice was flat. "Got nothing else to say without my lawyer present." "Your lawyer is present. He's sitting right there," Catherine pointed. and I'm simply asking what you were doing near Blackthorn Ranch at 2 in the morning. Riding, checking fence lines. I don't recall exactly. Checking fence lines at 2 in the morning. It's when I work sometimes. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. Miss Hayes, if you have actual evidence connecting this witness to the barn fire, present it. Otherwise, move on. I'm establishing a pattern of harassment, Your Honor. Mr. Morrison is one of several individuals employed by Mr. Ashford who've been present during incidents at Blackthorn Ranch. Coincidence isn't evidence. Move on or I'll hold you in contempt. Catherine moved on, but the damage was done. Or rather, wasn't done. Without proof, it was just accusation. The closing arguments happened on day 4. Ashford's lawyers argued that the Graysons' claim to the land was legally invalid, that their father's homestead papers were improperly filed, that years of occupation didn't create ownership. Catherine argued passion and justice and the rights of working families against powerful men who used the law as a weapon. Judge Morrison looked like he was sleeping. The ruling came an hour later. No deliberation, no careful consideration, just Morrison reading from notes that looked pre-written. In the matter of Ashford versus Grayson, I find the defendant's claim to the property legally insufficient. The land in question is hereby awarded to the plaintiff, Richard Ashford. The defendants have 30 days to vacate the premises. The gavel came down. Final. Sarah made a sound like something had broken inside her. Jack's face went stone. Caleb just sat there, staring at nothing. Outside the courthouse, they gathered on the steps like survivors of a disaster. Catherine looked furious enough to commit violence. I'll file an appeal. We can— No. Caleb's voice was quiet but firm. No more courts. No more lawyers. We lost. It's over. It's not over. The appeal process costs money we don't have and time we don't have. Ashford won. Let him have his victory. Caleb turned to his sister. We've got 30 days to pack up everything and find somewhere else to live. Where? Sarah's voice was small. Where do we go with a baby and no money and no prospects? I don't know, but we'll figure it out. He looked at Jack. We always do. They started walking away. Evelyn watched them go, feeling helpless and furious and sick with the injustice of it all. Catherine grabbed her arm. Wait. There might be one more option. What option? The judge was bought. The case was fixed. I know, but Ashford made a mistake. Catherine's eyes were bright. He was so focused on winning the land case that he forgot about the criminal charges against Morrison. If we can prove Morrison burned that barn on Ashford's orders, we can go after Ashford for conspiracy. Criminal charges. No bought judge can protect him from those. You have proof? Not yet. But Morrison's trial is in 6 weeks, and I'm going to be there, and I'm going to make sure every dirty detail comes out. Catherine's voice was steel. Ashford thinks he won. He thinks this is over, but I'm just getting started. Evelyn looked at the Graysons disappearing into the Helena streets, then back at Catherine's determined face. Tell me what you need, she said. Time, resources, and someone to keep the Graysons from giving up completely before Morrison's trial. Catherine gripped her shoulder. Can you do that? I can try. Then we're not done yet. That night, Evelyn found Caleb at a cheap boarding house, sitting alone in the common room with a bottle of whiskey he hadn't touched. Catherine has a plan, she said, sitting across from him. Catherine always has a plan. Doesn't mean it'll work. Morrison's trial. If she can prove he was acting on Ashford's orders, then Ashford gets criminal charges. Maybe. Probably not. Caleb looked at her with exhausted eyes. Even if it works, we still lost the ranch, still have nowhere to go. You have 30 days. That's time to— Time to what? Pack up our lives? Watch our mother's grave disappear in Ashford's rear view? Pretend we're okay with losing everything our father built? His voice cracked. I'm tired, Evelyn. Tired of fighting. Tired of losing. Just tired. She reached across the table and took his hand. He didn't pull away. Then rest, she said quietly. For tonight, just rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next. He looked at their joined hands like he was surprised to find them there. Why are you still here? You got dragged into our mess, buried in debt because of it. You could leave. Should leave. Where would I go? Anywhere. Somewhere without Ashford. Somewhere you could start fresh. I tried starting fresh, ended up right back here. She squeezed his hand. Maybe here is where I'm supposed to be. Here is nowhere. A dying town next to a ranch we're losing. Here is where people fought for me when I had nothing, where they offered what little they had to help me survive. That's not nowhere. She met his eyes. That's home. Or close enough. Something in his expression shifted. Before she could identify what, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was brief, clumsy, tasting like desperation and whiskey he hadn't drunk. When he pulled back, his eyes were wide, like he'd surprised himself. Sorry, I shouldn't have. She kissed him back. Longer this time, her hand moving to the back of his neck, his arm wrapping around her waist. It felt like drowning and surfacing at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. That was, he started. Unexpected, she finished. But not unwelcome? Definitely not unwelcome. She rested her forehead against his. Though your timing is terrible. He laughed, rough and quiet. Yeah, probably should have kissed you before losing everything. You haven't lost everything yet. Pretty close. Then let's make sure you don't lose the rest. They sat there in the cheap boarding house, holding each other like anchors, while outside the world continued its relentless forward motion. Tomorrow they'd have to face reality, the lost ranch, the uncertain future, Morrison's trial, and whatever slim hope it offered. But tonight, just for a few hours, they let themselves have this. Each other. And the stubborn, foolish belief that maybe the fight wasn't over after all. Morning came too early, dragging them back to a reality that hadn't improved overnight. Caleb left before dawn to meet Jack and Sarah, while Evelyn stayed behind to settle accounts at the boarding house. The kiss hung between them, unspoken but present, like a promise neither of them knew how to keep. The ride back to Cedar Falls was silent. Sarah held Thomas, who fussed and cried like he understood something terrible had happened. Jack stared out the window with the expression of a man who'd stopped hoping. Caleb sat rigid, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. 30 days, Sarah said finally. What do we even do with 30 days? Pack. Sort through what we can take and what we have to leave. Jack's voice was hollow. Figure out where we're going, though hell if I know where that is. We could try further west, Oregon maybe. I heard there's land. There's always land somewhere else. That's not the point. Caleb's voice was sharp. The point is, that was our land, our home. And Ashford took it because he could. Then what do you want to do? Sarah asked. Fight a ruling we can't appeal? Stay on the property until he sends men with guns to remove us? Die on principle? Maybe. Caleb looked at her. Would that be so terrible? At least we'd go down fighting instead of slinking away with our tails between our legs. You have a nephew who needs his uncle alive, not dead over a piece of dirt. It's not just dirt, Sarah, it's everything. It's already gone. Her voice broke. Ashford won. The judge gave him the land. We can rage about it all we want, but it doesn't change reality. Evelyn watched them tear at each other, grief disguised as anger, and wanted to scream. Instead, she said quietly, Catherine thinks Morrison's trial might change things. Catherine thinks a lot of things. Jack didn't look away from the window. Doesn't mean any of them will happen. She's right about this. If Morrison admits Ashford ordered the barn burning, that's criminal conspiracy. Ashford could face actual consequences. And we still lose the ranch. Criminal charges against Ashford don't change the land ruling. Caleb's voice was flat. We're arguing over crumbs while he takes the whole meal. They fell silent again. Outside, Montana rolled past, indifferent to human suffering. The landscape that had seemed harsh but beautiful when Evelyn first arrived now just looked empty. Endless and empty. Cedar Falls appeared like a mirage, shabby and small and somehow still standing. Ruth was waiting at the general store when they pulled in, took one look at their faces and said, That bad? We lost. Sarah climbed down from the wagon, Thomas heavy in her arms. 30 days to vacate. The word spread through town like wildfire. By evening, half the settlement knew the Graysons were losing their ranch. By the next morning, people started appearing at Blackthorn with offers of help. Got a barn you can store things in, one farmer said. Not much, but it's dry. We can take the horses, another offered. Keep them fed until you figure out what's next. There's a cabin on my property, a third voice called. Small, but it'll fit your family till you find permanent shelter. The Graysons stood in their yard, soon to be Ashford's yard, surrounded by neighbors offering what little they had. Sarah started crying. Jack looked like he'd been punched. Even Caleb's rigid composure cracked slightly. "You don't have to do this," he said roughly. "We'll manage. Course you will, but you'll manage better with help." Ruth crossed her arms. "Besides, Ashford thinks he's isolated you. Prove nobody will stand with you. Let's show him he's wrong." Over the next 2 weeks, Blackthorn Ranch transformed into organized chaos. People came to help pack, sort, salvage. They worked in shifts, making sure someone was always there, turning what should have been a lonely defeat into something that felt almost like community. Evelyn took time off from teaching to help. She packed Sarah's kitchen, labeled boxes of tools, wrapped dishes in old newspaper. Physical work that let her brain shut off and her hands just move. She was in the barn sorting through tack when Caleb found her. "You don't have to be here," he said. "You've got your own work, your own debts." "I'm exactly where I need to be." She set down the bridle she'd been examining. "Unless you're telling me to leave?" "No, I just—" He stopped, struggling with words. "That night in Helena. What happened between us? I shouldn't have assumed. You didn't assume anything. I kissed you back, remember?" "I remember." His voice went rough. "But that was when everything was falling apart. Maybe now that there's daylight and reality, you've reconsidered." Evelyn walked over to him, close enough to see the exhaustion carved into his face. "Have you reconsidered?" "No." "Then we're in agreement." She reached up and kissed him, brief and deliberate. When she pulled back, his eyes were dark. "Whatever happens next, we face it together. That's the deal." "That's a terrible deal for you. I've got nothing to offer." "You've got yourself. That's enough." He pulled her against him, holding on like she might disappear. They stood there in the barn that would soon belong to someone else, surrounded by the debris of a life being dismantled, and somehow it felt like the start of something instead of just an ending. Morrison's trial began 3 weeks after the Graysons lost their land case. Catherine had been preparing obsessively, digging through every detail of the barn fire, interviewing witnesses, building a case that could actually stick. The courtroom was different this time, smaller, more utilitarian, with a judge who looked less bribable. Judge Warren, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. Morrison sat at the defendant's table looking resigned. His lawyer was competent but clearly working with limited materials. Hard to defend a client everyone knew was guilty. Catherine's opening statement was surgical. The evidence will show that the defendant, acting on orders from his employer Richard Ashford, deliberately set fire to property belonging to the Grayson family. This wasn't random vandalism. It was calculated intimidation designed to force the Graysons off land Mr. Ashford wanted for himself. Morrison's lawyer objected. Judge Warren overruled. "Continue, Miss Hayes." The first witness was the man who'd seen Morrison near Blackthorn Ranch the night of the fire. A farmer named Patterson who'd been checking his own livestock and recognized Morrison's distinctive horse. "You're certain it was the defendant?" Catherine asked. "Certain as I'm standing here. That horse has a white blaze shaped like lightning, only one like it in the territory." "And what was the defendant doing when you saw him?" "Riding away from the Grayson property. Fast, like he was running from something." "What time was this?" "Around 2 in the morning, maybe later." Morrison's lawyer tried to shake the testimony on cross-examination, but Patterson held firm. He'd seen what he'd seen. The second day, Catherine called a witness no one expected. One of Ashford's other employees, a man named Curtis, who'd apparently grown a conscience. "Mr. Curtis, you work for Richard Ashford, correct?" "I did. Quit last month." Curtis looked uncomfortable but determined. Couldn't stomach it anymore. Couldn't stomach what? The things he had us do. Harassment, intimidation. He'd tell Morrison what needed doing, Morrison would tell us, and we'd make it happen. "Can you be more specific?" "Cut fences, spook cattle, poison wells." Curtis's voice was flat. "Small stuff mostly, stuff that could look like accidents, but the barn, that was different. That was meant to send a message." The courtroom erupted. Judge Warren banged her gavel. Ashford, sitting in the gallery, had gone pale. "Did you participate in burning the barn?" Catherine asked when order was restored. "No, that was all Morrison, but I knew it was coming. Ashford told him to make something happen that the Graysons couldn't ignore." "Objection," Morrison's lawyer shot up. Hearsay. This witness has no direct knowledge of my client's conversations with Mr. Ashford. I was there when Ashford gave the order, Curtis said before Judge Warren could rule. Heard him tell Morrison to make the Graysons understand they needed to leave. Said he didn't care how, just make it happen. The judge leaned forward. You heard Richard Ashford directly order this witness to commit arson? Not arson specifically, but yeah, I heard him order Morrison to do whatever it took to drive the Graysons off. Morrison's lawyer was sweating. Ashford looked like he wanted to kill Curtis where he sat. Catherine looked triumphant. The trial continued for 3 more days. Witness after witness testified to Morrison's presence at Blackthorn, to the pattern of harassment, to Ashford's involvement in directing it all. Morrison himself took the stand and, faced with overwhelming evidence, finally broke. Yeah, I burned the barn, he said, voice dead. Ashford paid me $500 to make sure the Graysons had problems. The barn was supposed to be the final push, make them too scared to stay. And Richard Ashford specifically ordered you to do this? Morrison looked at Ashford in the gallery. Whatever he saw there made his decision. Yeah, he ordered it, told me exactly what he wanted and how much he'd pay. The verdict came back in less than an hour. Guilty on all counts: arson, conspiracy, criminal mischief. Morrison was sentenced to 5 years in territorial prison. But the real victory was what happened next. Judge Warren, clearly furious about what had been revealed, issued a bench warrant for Richard Ashford's arrest on conspiracy charges. Federal marshals appeared before Ashford could leave the courthouse. This is outrageous, Ashford sputtered as they put him in irons. I'll have your job, Warren. You'll never work in this territory again. Perhaps, Judge Warren's voice was ice, but you'll be explaining yourself to a federal judge first. Take him away. Catherine found the Graysons outside the courthouse, practically vibrating with energy. Criminal conspiracy charges. Federal case. If we're lucky, Ashford goes to prison. If we're really lucky, his entire business empire gets investigated. What about the ranch? Caleb asked. We still lost the land ruling. That was a territorial court decision based on property law. But if we can prove Ashford obtained that ruling through fraud and intimidation, which we can, now that Morrison's testimony is on record, we can petition for the ruling to be overturned. Can we? Sarah's voice was careful, like she was afraid to hope. It's not guaranteed, but it's possible. More than possible. Catherine grabbed Sarah's hands. We actually have a shot at getting your land back. The legal battle that followed was long and complicated. Ashford hired expensive lawyers who fought every step of the process. But Catherine was relentless, and now she had ammunition. Morrison's confession, Curtis's testimony, the pattern of criminal behavior all documented in federal court records. Ashford's trial for conspiracy lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution laid out years of intimidation, violence, and corruption. Witness after witness testified to threats, bribes, destroyed livelihoods. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Guilty on 14 counts. Ashford was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. His business holdings were ordered liquidated to pay restitution to his victims, including, Catherine made sure, the Graysons. The petition to overturn the land ruling went before a different judge, Judge Matthews, who took one look at the evidence of Ashford's criminal conspiracy and called the previous ruling a mockery of justice. 6 months after losing Blackthorn Ranch in court, the Graysons got it back. Evelyn was in the schoolhouse when Caleb rode into town with the news. She saw him through the window, moving faster than he had in months, and knew before he said anything. We won, he said, breathless. The ruling's overturned. The ranch is ours. Actually, legally, permanently ours. She dismissed the students early and threw her arms around him. They stood in the schoolhouse doorway kissing while the whole town watched, and neither of them cared. That night, Cedar Falls threw a celebration that turned into a 3-day party. People brought food, music, stories. Someone produced a fiddle. Dancing started and didn't stop until dawn. Evelyn found herself pulled into dance after dance, laughing until her sides hurt, feeling lighter than she had in years. Caleb watched from the sidelines with an expression she'd never seen before, something like peace. You should dance, she said, catching his hand between songs. I don't dance. You do tonight. She pulled him into the crowd. He was terrible at it, all awkward angles and mistimed steps. She didn't care. They stumbled through something that might have been a waltz, both of them grinning like fools. I love you, he said suddenly, mid-spin. She nearly tripped. What? I love you. Figured I should say it before I lose my nerve. His ears were red. You don't have to say it back, just wanted you to know. You're an idiot. She kissed him hard. I love you too. Have for months, probably. Since when? Since you let me stay during that first storm? Since you trusted me when I warned you about Ashford? Since you kept fighting when anyone sensible would have given up? She rested her forehead against his. Pick a moment. They're all true. They danced until the music stopped, until the crowd thinned, until it was just the two of them in the empty street under Montana stars. Marry me, Caleb said. Evelyn pulled back to look at him. Are you serious? Completely. I know it's fast, and I know I've got nothing but a ranch that's been half destroyed in a family that comes with complications. But I want... He stopped, searching for words. I want you in my life. Permanently. If you'll have me. Yes. No hesitation. Yes, absolutely yes. They were married 3 months later in the schoolhouse, because Evelyn insisted and Caleb didn't argue. Catherine came from Helena to witness. Ruth cried through the entire ceremony. Sarah held Thomas, who babbled happily through the vows. Jack stood as Caleb's witness and only made 3 jokes about his brother-in-law finally settling down. The ceremony was simple. The circuit judge who'd agreed to perform it spoke for maybe 5 minutes about commitment and partnership. Evelyn wore a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric the town had pooled money to buy. Caleb wore his only suit, which fit badly and made him look uncomfortable. They said their vows in front of 30 people crammed into a schoolhouse that still leaked when it rained. It was nothing like the wedding Evelyn had imagined as a girl in Boston, dreaming of silk and flowers and churches with stained glass. It was better. I promise to stand beside you, Caleb said, his voice rough, through whatever comes. Good harvests and bad, floods and droughts. Ashford's gone, but there'll be other battles. I promise to fight them with you. Evelyn's turn. I promise not to run when things get hard. To stay even when leaving would be easier. To build something with you that's worth all the struggle it took to get here, she smiled. And to only occasionally remind you that I was right about Ashford. Laughter. Caleb grinned. Deal. The kiss that followed was witnessed by everyone who'd helped them survive, and the cheering could probably be heard in the next county. The years that followed weren't easy. Easy wasn't something frontier life offered, but they were good in ways that mattered more than comfort. Evelyn kept teaching. The school grew until they had to build an addition, then a second building. Students who'd started barely able to read graduated able to handle accounting, write letters, understand contracts. Some went on to larger schools in Helena or further east. Others stayed and built lives in Cedar Falls, which grew from a struggling settlement into an actual town. She paid off her debts. Not quickly. It took 7 years of careful budgeting and constant work. 7 years of teaching and mending and bookkeeping and doing whatever jobs came her way. But eventually, the last payment was made. The debt that had driven her west in the first place finally, permanently gone. Caleb rebuilt Blackthorn Ranch into something sustainable. Not huge, not wealthy, but solid. He and Jack worked the land with help from hired hands when they could afford them. Sarah managed the books and raised Thomas, who grew into a boy who loved horses and hated arithmetic. The ranch had good years and bad years. Cattle died in winter storms. Droughts threatened crops. Equipment broke at the worst possible times. But they survived all of it because they'd learned how to survive together. Evelyn and Caleb built a house on the ranch. Nothing fancy, just solid walls and a roof that didn't leak. It had a room for Sarah and Jack and Thomas when they visited, and a study where Evelyn could prepare lessons, and a porch where they'd sit in the evenings watching the sun go down over land that was actually, legally, permanently theirs. They had 2 children, a daughter named Alice, who inherited her mother's stubbornness and her father's silence. A son named James, who talked enough for 3 people and wanted to be everything from a cowboy to a lawyer depending on the day. Evelyn taught them alongside the other children in Cedar Falls, refusing to give them special treatment. Alice resented this until she was old enough to understand that fairness mattered more than favoritism. James never resented anything, too busy charming his way through childhood. Catherine Hayes became a frequent visitor, staying at the ranch whenever she had cases in the area. She and Evelyn would sit up late arguing about law and justice, and how much had changed in Montana since Ashford's imprisonment. Sometimes a lot had changed, sometimes not nearly enough. The territory is still run by rich men, Catherine said once during one of these late-night conversations. Ashford's gone, but there are others just like him. So we keep fighting them. Evelyn poured more coffee. Same as we always have. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, it's just necessary. She looked out the window at the dark ranch. Someone has to stand up. Might as well be us. Ruth lived to see Cedar Falls become a proper town with 3 streets and a hotel and a church. She died at 73, surrounded by people who'd come to Montana with nothing and built lives anyway. Evelyn spoke at her funeral, talking about how Ruth had been the first person to offer help when everyone else was too scared of Ashford to get involved. She taught me that community isn't something you find, Evelyn said. It's something you build, one choice at a time, one person helping another until suddenly you've got something worth protecting. The school that had started in a building that should have been condemned eventually became 3 buildings with 6 teachers. Evelyn trained each one personally, making sure they understood that teaching wasn't about creating perfect students. It was about giving children tools to build their own futures. On her 50th birthday, the town threw her a celebration. Dozens of former students showed up, some with children of their own now. They told stories about lessons she'd taught, mistakes she'd made, the time she'd thrown a book at Jacob for putting a snake in Margaret's desk. "You were terrifying," Jacob said, now a grown man running his family's expanded farm. "But you cared. That mattered more than whether we liked you." "I wanted you to learn," Evelyn said. "Whether you liked me was secondary. We liked you anyway. Eventually." Caleb watched from the edge of the celebration, gray in his hair now, but still solid, still standing. They'd been married 23 years, and sometimes Evelyn still caught herself surprised by the life they'd built. That night, lying in bed in the house they'd built together, she said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if that stagecoach hadn't broken down? You'd have worked for Ashford, probably would have quit eventually anyway. Maybe. Or maybe I'd have convinced myself to stay, taken the easy money and ignored everything else." Caleb turned to look at her. "You really think you could have done that?" She thought about the woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach expecting luxury and security, about how that woman had been so focused on escaping her father's debts that she'd almost missed the chance to escape herself. "No," she said finally, "I don't think I could have, but it scares me how close I came to trying." "You didn't, though. That's what matters." "Is it?" "Of course it is. We don't get judged on what we almost did, just what we actually do." He pulled her closer. "And what you did was stay, fight, build something real. That counts for more than intentions." Years later, when Evelyn was 63 and arthritis made writing on chalkboards difficult, she finally retired from teaching. The town held another celebration, though this one was quieter. Just dinner with the current teachers and some of the families whose children she'd taught. "What will you do now?" one of the younger teachers asked. "Just rest." Evelyn laughed. "I'm 63, not dead. There's plenty left to do." What she did was write. Not a memoir exactly, but a record. She wrote about coming west, about Ashford and the trials and the struggle to build something worth keeping. She wrote about the people who'd helped when helping was dangerous, about Catherine's fierce advocacy and Ruth's practical kindness and the Graysons' stubborn refusal to quit. She wrote about learning that security and comfort weren't the same as purpose, that sometimes the right choice was the hard one, that power only won when good people decided fighting was too expensive. The manuscript sat in a desk drawer for 2 years before she showed it to anyone. Caleb read it first, sitting up late one night while she pretended to sleep. "This is good," he said finally. "You should publish it." "It's just our story, nothing special. Our story is exactly what makes it special." He set the pages down carefully. "People need to know that fighting back is possible, that you can face down someone with all the money and power and still win. We almost didn't win. Almost doesn't count. We did win, eventually." He smiled. "And maybe someone else reads this and realizes they can too." The book was published by a small press in Helena. It didn't sell many copies, but the ones it did sell seemed to matter. Evelyn got letters from teachers in other territories, from families fighting their own battles against powerful men, from people who needed to believe that resistance was possible. One letter came from a woman in Wyoming whose husband had been killed in a mine collapse caused by the owner's negligence. She was fighting for compensation, and everyone told her to give up. "Your book reminded me that giving up isn't the only option," she wrote. "I'm going to keep fighting. Even if I lose, at least I'll know I tried." Evelyn wrote back, "Trying is everything. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Caleb died at 71, quietly in his sleep after a day spent fixing fences. The funeral was huge. People came from all over the territory to pay respects to a man who'd fought for his land and won, who'd built something lasting, who'd stood up when standing up cost everything. Evelyn spoke at this funeral too, though it was harder than Ruth's had been. "He taught me that home isn't a place you find. It's something you defend, something you build with your own hands and refuse to let anyone take from you." Her voice cracked. "He taught me what it means to stand your ground." She lived another 12 years without him. Alice and James made sure she was taken care of, though she insisted on staying in the house on Blackthorn Ranch. Sarah had died 5 years before Caleb, but Jack was still around, old and weathered but still working the land. Thomas, now a man with his own family, had taken over most of the ranch work. "You should move to town," Alice said during one visit. "Live closer to the school, to people." "This is where I belong," Evelyn gestured at the ranch. "Your father and I built this. I'm not leaving it until I have to." She spent her last years watching her grandchildren grow up on land their grandfather had fought to keep. She watched Cedar Falls continue to expand, the school system she'd helped build educate another generation. She watched Montana change from a rough frontier into something more settled, though the bones of that frontier life still showed through. On her 83rd birthday, sitting on the porch of the house she and Caleb had built, surrounded by family and friends, someone asked if she had any regrets. "Regrets about what?" she asked. "Leaving Boston, coming west, all the struggle." Evelyn thought about the stagecoach that had broken down in a blizzard, about the woman who'd stepped into that storm expecting to find one future and discovered an entirely different one, about every hard choice and expensive victory that had followed. "No regrets," she said. "It cost more than I expected. Took longer than I hoped, but I wouldn't trade it for anything easier." She died 6 months later, peacefully, in the bed she'd shared with Caleb for 47 years. The funeral filled the largest church in Cedar Falls, now a real town with paved streets and electric lights, though the schoolhouse where she'd taught for decades was still standing. James spoke for the family. "My mother taught hundreds of students over her life, but the most important lesson she taught wasn't in a classroom. It was how she lived. She showed us that you don't have to accept injustice just because it's powerful, that fighting back is possible, even when everyone says it isn't. That building something worth keeping requires refusing to let anyone take it from you." They buried her next to Caleb on a hill overlooking Blackthorn Ranch. The headstone was simple. Evelyn Mercer Grayson, 1842 to 1925. Teacher. Wife. Fighter. Years later, students would still learn about her in Montana history classes, about the governess who'd stood up to one of the territory's most powerful men and won, about the teacher who'd built a school system that educated generations, about the woman who'd come west looking for security and found purpose instead. But the real legacy wasn't in history books. It was in the town that still stood, in the school that still taught, in the ranch that still belonged to the family that had fought for it. It was in every person who'd learned that power only wins when you let it, that fighting back is possible, that home is something you build and defend and refuse to surrender. The stagecoach that had broken down in a blizzard all those years ago hadn't taken Evelyn to the wrong destination after all. It had carried her exactly where she needed to be, not to comfort or security or the easy life she'd imagined, but to a place where she could become someone worth being, where she could fight for something that mattered, where she could build a life that meant something beyond just surviving. And in the end, that was worth every struggle it took to get there.